The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy and consciousness. For millennia, the Jedi believed they understood its depths. The Sith thought they had mastered its power. But what happens when something from beyond the stars arrives, something that doesn't just touch the Force, but seeks to devour it, reshape it, and turn it into a weapon of absolute control? What happens when gods demand worship, and the Force itself becomes their tool of conversion? The first sign came as a distortion in hyperspace, a ripple so massive it registered on every navigation computer from the core worlds to the outer rim. Imperial remnant fleets, still regrouping after the Emperor's death at Endor, detected massive energy signatures emerging from coordinates that shouldn't exist. New Republic sensors went wild as 6 colossal vessels tore through the fabric of space itself, not through hyperspace lanes, but through something else entirely, a dimensional breach that left reality scarred in their wake. The warships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Where star destroyers were angular and brutish, these vessels were elegant yet terrifying, golden and white, shaped like elongated pyramids with sweeping wings that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Each ship stretched over 3 kilometers in length, dwarfing even Imperial-class destroyers. Their hulls weren't durasteel or quadanium, they were composed of a material that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal frozen in time. Energy crackled along their surfaces, not from weapons charging, but from the ships themselves, as if they were living things. The first world they reached was Jindine, a minor industrial planet in the expansion region. The defense fleet. 3 Nebulan B frigates and a handful of CR-90 corvettes, moved to intercept, broadcasting standard hails on all frequencies. The response came not as a transmission, but as a voice that seemed to echo inside the mind of every living being in the system. Hallowed are the Ori. The words resonated with a power that made veteran captains clutch their heads, that sent astromech droids into diagnostic loops, that caused Force sensitives across 3 sectors to gasp and stagger. It wasn't telepathy, it was something deeper, something that bypassed ears and struck directly at the consciousness itself. A single beam of light erupted from the lead Ori warship. It wasn't red like a turbolaser or green like an ion cannon, it was pure white, incandescent, and when it touched the first frigate, the ship didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. The beam swept across the defense fleet in seconds, and 6 ships became nothing but dissipating energy signatures. On the surface of Jindine, 3 billion people looked up as the golden warships descended through the atmosphere. They didn't bombard the cities. They didn't deploy troops. Instead, 6 figures emerged from the lead ship, descending on pillars of light that carved through the clouds like divine pronouncements. The priors had arrived. They wore robes of white and gold, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods, and each carried a staff topped with a crystalline ornament that pulsed with inner fire. When they spoke, their voices carried across entire continents, amplified by technology and something far more primal. We are the messengers of the Ori, the true gods of all creation. For too long, you have lived in darkness, worshipping false idols and empty philosophies. The Force you speak of is but a shadow of the true power, the power of the Ori, who created all things and demand only your faith in return. Kneel before the Ori, accept their truth, and you shall know peace eternal. Resist, and know only oblivion. The governor of Jindine, a former imperial moth named Eris Talon, refused. He ordered planetary defenses to fire, mobilized ground forces, and sent desperate pleas for aid to both the New Republic and the remaining imperial warlords. The priors simply raised their staffs. Reality bent. The planetary shield generators exploded from within, not from external attack but from some invisible force that twisted metal and circuitry into molten slag. Defense turrets swiveled and fired on their own crews. Soldiers found their blasters fusing into useless lumps of metal in their hands. And Governor Talon himself was lifted into the air by an unseen power, his body rigid as a prior approached, staff glowing brighter with each step. You resist the word of the Ori. You cling to your false beliefs. This is the consequence of heresy. The prior touched his staff to the governor's chest, and Aristotle screamed, not in pain, but in revelation. His eyes glowed white, his body convulsed, and when the light faded, he fell to his knees, weeping with joy. Hallowed are the Ori, he whispered, and the conversion began. Within hours, 80% of Jindine's population had witnessed the prior's power through planetary holonet broadcasts. The images showed miracles: the sick healed with a touch, the elderly made young, the hungry fed by materializing food from thin air. But beneath the miracles lay the demand: worship or die. By the end of the first day, Governor Talon stood before the cameras, his face serene, his voice steady. The Ori have shown me truth. They are gods, and we are their children. The Force is a lie. The Jedi were false prophets. The Empire worshipped empty power. But the Ori offer salvation to all who believe. I have ordered all resistance to cease. New Republic intelligence flagged it immediately. Imperial remnant commanders watched in horror and fascination. And on a moisture farm on Tatooine, Luke Skywalker felt a disturbance in the Force so profound that he dropped the hydrospanner he'd been holding and looked up at the twin suns, his heart racing. Something terrible had entered the galaxy. Something that didn't fear the Force, it wanted to consume it. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The Ori warships didn't stop at Jindine. Within a week, 4 more systems fell: Bombprail, Ord Mantell's outer colonies, Ambria, and Felucia. Each conquest followed the same pattern: overwhelming force, demonstrations of godlike power, conversion of the populace through a mixture of genuine miracles and absolute terror. The priors moved through cities like divine avatars, their staffs reshaping matter, healing the wounded, striking down those who resisted with casual gestures that left only ash. But the Ori weren't satisfied with simple conquest. They were searching for something, and their priors interrogated captured New Republic officers, former Imperial scientists, and smugglers with disturbing precision. They asked about legends, about energy fields, about beings who could move objects with their minds. They asked about the Force. And when they finally captured a young man on Felucia who could make small objects levitate, who had been hiding his abilities since the Empire's Jedi purge, everything changed. The priors took him aboard their warship, and for 3 days, the boy's screams echoed across the system through the Force itself, a psychic wail that every Force-sensitive within 100 light-years felt like a knife to the skull. When the priors emerged from their ship, they were different. Their eyes glowed not just with white light, but with something darker, something electric. When they raised their hands, objects didn't just move, they disintegrated. When they spoke, their words carried the weight of compulsion that no ordinary mind could resist. They had taken the boy's midi-chlorians, studied them, replicated them, and infused their own bodies with the Force. The Ori had just become something far more dangerous than invaders. They had become Force gods. On Coruscant, in the ruins of the Imperial Palace, the fractured remains of the Empire's command structure received the reports with growing dread. On Chandrila, Mon Mothma convened an emergency session of the New Republic Senate, her face pale as intelligence officers detailed the impossible, an enemy that commanded technology beyond comprehension and now wielded the Force itself. And in the shadows between star systems, Darth Vader's Super Star Destroyer, the Executor II, changed course. The Dark Lord had been hunting remaining Imperial warlords who refused to acknowledge the Empire's defeat, but now he had a new target. These Ori claimed to be gods. Vader would show them the true power of the dark side. He had no idea he was about to face something even his master, the Emperor, could never have prepared him for. The Imperial Moff who would become the Ori's first true convert among the Empire's elite was named Jareth Sarken, and he commanded the Crimson Reach sector from a modified interdictor-class star destroyer called the Unyielding Doctrine. Sarken had been a loyalist to Emperor Palpatine, a true believer in the Imperial vision of order through absolute power. When news of the Emperor's death reached him, He had refused to surrender to the new republic, instead carving out his own territory in the mid-rim, enforcing imperial law with an iron fist while waiting for a new leader to emerge and restore the empire to its former glory. The Ori found him patrolling the Atrevis sector, his ship surrounded by a small flotilla of support vessels, 2 Victory-class star destroyers and a handful of escort frigates. Sarkin's initial response to the appearance of 3 Ori warships was textbook imperial arrogance: demand identification, threaten overwhelming force, prepare to demonstrate the superiority of imperial military doctrine. His communications officer opened a channel, and Sarkin himself delivered the ultimatum. Unknown vessels, you have entered imperial space without authorization. Identify yourselves immediately and prepare to be boarded, or you will be destroyed. The response came as it had on Jindine, not through the communication channel, but directly into the minds of every being aboard the unyielding doctrine. Officers clutched their temples, stormtroopers staggered in corridors, and Moff Sarkin himself gripped the edge of his command throne as the voice reverberated through his consciousness. We are the priors of the Ori, and we bring salvation to those who would accept truth. Your empire is dead, Moff Sarkin. Your emperor was a false prophet who wielded stolen power and called it strength. The Ori are the true gods, and they offer you something your empire never could: eternal purpose, divine protection, and a place in the Holy Crusade that will unite this galaxy under one truth. Sarkin's face twisted with rage. Open fire. All batteries, maximum yield. Destroy them. The unyielding doctrine's turbolaser batteries erupted in a coordinated barrage, green bolts of superheated plasma converging on the lead Ori warship. The Victory-class destroyers added their firepower, and for a moment, the void blazed with enough destructive energy to vaporize a moon. The Imperial gunners were among the best, their targeting solutions were perfect, their timing synchronized. The beams struck the Ori warship and simply stopped. Not deflected by shields, not absorbed, stopped. The Ori vessel didn't even slow its approach. Impossible, Sarkin whispered. And then the prior's voice filled his mind again, but this time it carried something new, a demonstration. One of the Victory-class destroyers simply inverted. Its hull twisted inside out like a piece of fabric being turned through itself, the metal screaming as molecular bonds were rearranged on a fundamental level. In 3 seconds, an 800-meter warship became an abstract sculpture of tortured steel and exposed interior chambers, its crew dead before they could even scream. The wreckage hung in space, a monument to the futility of resistance. Sarkin's bridge fell silent. Officers stared at their sensor displays, trying to comprehend what they just witnessed. There had been no weapon discharge, no energy signature, just will made manifest. You see now, the voice continued, gentle and terrible. Your weapons are meaningless. Your empire's strength was always an illusion. But the Ori do not wish to destroy you, Moff Sarkin. They wish to elevate you. Come aboard our vessel. See what we offer. If you still wish to resist afterward, you may return to your ship, and we will leave this sector. It was a lie, but Sarkin didn't know that yet. He was a military man, trained to assess strategic situations, and what he saw was an enemy that could obliterate his entire flotilla without effort. He also saw an opportunity. If these beings truly possessed such power, and if they could be reasoned with, perhaps even allied with, then maybe the Empire could rise again, this time backed by genuinely unstoppable force. I'll come alone, Sarkin said, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. Prepare my shuttle. 20 minutes later, Moff Jareth Sarkin stepped off his shuttle and into a chamber that defied everything he understood about ship design. The interior of the Ori warship was vast, cathedral-like, with sweeping arches of that same liquid metal material glowing with soft golden light. The air hummed with energy, and Sarkin could feel it against his skin, not heat, but presence, as if the ship itself were alive and aware of him. 3 priors waited at the chamber center, their staffs planted before them, their faces still hidden in shadow. But as Sarkin approached, one of them lowered his hood, and the Moff froze. The prior's face was human, or had been once. Now it seemed transfigured, the skin almost translucent, the eyes glowing with that eerie white light. But there was something else now, something new, crackling lines of energy that danced across the prior's temples, energy that Sarkhan had seen before in holoreels from the Clone Wars, in footage of Emperor Palpatine's final moments. Force lightning. You recognize this power, the prior said, his voice no longer booming but conversational, almost friendly. Your emperor wielded it. The Sith lords before him wielded it. But they understood only a fraction of its true potential. They called it the Force, as if giving it a name made it theirs to command. But the Force is merely an echo of the Ori's power, a shadow cast by true divinity. The prior raised his hand, and Sarkhan felt himself lifted off the deck without being touched. He floated there, suspended, helpless, as the prior approached. We have learned of this energy field your galaxy worships. We have taken it into ourselves, merged it with the power the Ori grant us. What your emperor took decades to master, we achieved in days. And now, we can do things that even he, with all his dark knowledge, never dreamed possible. The prior gestured with his staff, and the chamber's walls became transparent, or perhaps the walls simply ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. Sarkhan found himself staring out into space, and what he saw made his breath catch. The remaining Victory-class destroyer was moving, but not under its own power. It hung suspended between two Ori warships, held in place by visible beams of golden light, and as Sarkhan watched, the light intensified. The Star Destroyer began to glow, its hull superheating, but it didn't explode. Instead, it was methodically disassembled, layer by layer, component by component, each piece carefully extracted and catalogued by the light itself. In minutes, an entire warship had been reduced to its constituent elements, floating in organized clusters like the galaxy's most precise salvage operation. We are learning your technology, the prior explained. Your weapons, your engines, your computers, all of it will be integrated into the Ori's holy arsenal. But technology alone is not enough. We need knowledge. We need understanding of this galaxy's power structures, its politics, its military capabilities. We need guides who know these things intimately. The prior lowered Sarkhan gently to the deck and stepped closer, close enough that the Moff could see his own reflection in those glowing eyes. You can be that guide, Jareth Sarkhan. You can help us bring order to this chaotic galaxy. The empire you served failed because it relied on fear alone. But the Ori offer something greater, purpose, belonging, and the genuine protection of divine power. Your stormtroopers will never fall in battle. Your ships will be invincible. Your enemies will bow not because they are forced to, but because they will see the truth and embrace it willingly. And if I refuse? Sarkhan managed to ask, though his voice was barely a whisper. The prior smiled, and it was not unkind. Then you return to your ship, as promised, and we leave this sector. But ask yourself, Moff, what future does your empire have without us? The new republic grows stronger every day. Your fellow imperial warlords fight each other instead of uniting. Your resources dwindle. Your cause is lost. The prior extended his hand. Or it was, until we arrived. Help us, and the empire will rise again, not as it was, but as it was always meant to be. An instrument of the Ori's will, bringing order and enlightenment to every world from the core to the unknown regions. Moff Jareth Sarkhan stood in that impossible chamber, staring at the offered hand, and thought of all the battles he'd fought, all the sacrifices he'd made in service to an empire that had crumbled in a single day at Endor. He thought of Emperor Palpatine, who had promised order and delivered only tyranny, who had died screaming in a reactor shaft while his superweapon burned. He thought of the decades ahead, hiding in the Outer Rim, fighting a losing war against superior numbers and dwindling resources. And then he thought of what these beings offered. Real power. Divine power. The chance to be part of something that wouldn't fail, couldn't fail, because it was backed by gods. He took the prior's hand. The transformation didn't happen all at once. The prior led Sarkhan deeper into the warship, into a chamber where a dozen robed figures chanted in a language that hurt to hear, where crystalline devices pulsed with energy that made the air itself ripple. They showed him visions, entire star systems bowing before the Ori, fleets of star destroyers painted gold and white, stormtroopers standing as holy warriors rather than faceless enforcers. They showed him purpose. But they also showed him the cost of resistance. Holographic displays materialized, showing the fates of worlds that had refused the Ori in their home galaxy. Cities turned to glass, populations simply erased from existence, entire civilizations reduced to cautionary tales. The priors called it mercy, claimed that such swift ends were kinder than allowing heresy to fester. By the time Sarkhan emerged from that chamber 6 hours later, he believed. Not because he'd been brainwashed, the Ori were too sophisticated for crude mind control. He believed because he'd been convinced, shown irrefutable evidence that the Ori were everything they claimed to be, and that resistance was not just futile but genuinely wrong. These were gods, and gods deserved worship. When Moff Sarkhan returned to the unyielding doctrine, his crew barely recognized him. His uniform was the same, his face unchanged, but something in his eyes had shifted. He walked onto the bridge with perfect calm, took his command throne, and issued a single order. Set course for the Corsan system. We're going to speak with Grand Admiral Pelion. It's time the Empire learned the truth. His executive officer hesitated. Sir, what truth? Sarkhan smiled, and for just a moment, his eyes reflected that same white glow the priors possessed. That the Ori have come to save us all. Hallowed are the Ori. And in that moment, the Empire's fall truly began, not through conquest, but through conversion. The Ori had learned something crucial. The galaxy's power structures were already in place, already efficient, already capable of enforcing order. They didn't need to destroy these structures. They only needed to control them. The boy's name had been Kale Vosric, and he had lived his entire life hiding what he was. Born on Felucia 3 years after the fall of the Republic, he had grown up in the shadow of Imperial occupation, watching stormtroopers patrol the fungal forests while his mother whispered warnings about never revealing his gift. She had been a Padawan once, survived Order 66 by sheer chance, and taught her son the most important lesson of the post-Jedi galaxy: invisibility meant survival. Kale had been careful. He only used the Force when absolutely alone, moving small stones in the deep jungle, feeling the life energy of the massive fungi that towered overhead. He dreamed of the Jedi Order his mother described, of lightsabers and temples and a time when people like him were heroes instead of hunted. But he never complained, never took risks, never drew attention. Until the Ori arrived on Felucia, and a prior walked past him in the marketplace of Quaitio, stopped, and turned to stare directly at him with glowing eyes. You, the prior said, his voice cutting through the crowd's fearful murmurs. You carry something precious within you. The power your people call the Force. We have sensed its presence across this world, but in you, it burns brighter than most. Kale had tried to run. His mother had grabbed his hand, tried to pull him into the crowd, but the prior simply raised his staff, and both of them froze mid-step, held immobile by invisible force. The prior approached slowly, studying Kale with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a fascinating specimen. Do not fear, child. The Ori do not destroy those touched by power, they elevate them. You will help us understand this force, and in return, you will witness wonders beyond imagination. They had taken him aboard the warship. His mother's screams followed him until the transport's ramp closed, cutting off the sound but not the memory. For 3 days, Kale existed in a nightmare of sterile chambers and priors who spoke in gentle tones while they did terrible things. They didn't torture him, not in any conventional sense. Instead, they studied him with instruments that felt like cold fire against his skin, devices that made his midi-chlorians light up under their scanning fields like stars in the void. They asked him to use the Force, to move objects, to sense emotions, to reach out with his feelings. When he refused, they didn't punish him. They simply showed him holographic recordings of Kwaitio, where stormtroopers were rounding up civilians, and explained that his cooperation would ensure his mother's safety. Kale cooperated. The priors mapped every aspect of his connection to the Force. They isolated his midi-chlorians, extracted samples, cultured them in laboratory conditions that Kale couldn't begin to understand. They discussed him as if he weren't there, speaking of midi-chlorian density, of force sensitivity being a biological trait that could be replicated, of how fascinating it was that this galaxy's inhabitants had evolved a symbiotic relationship with microscopic organisms that granted access to universal energy. On the third day, they brought him to a chamber unlike anything he'd seen before. It was circular, walls lined with the same crystalline structures that powered the Ori warships, and at its center stood a device that looked like a combination of medical equipment and something older, something that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent awareness. 6 priors stood around the device, their staffs raised, chanting in that language that made Kale's ears ache. "What you have given us willingly or not," the lead prior said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber, "will change everything. The Ori have conquered galaxies, brought countless civilizations to enlightenment, but never before have we encountered a power quite like this force. It is not magic in the way we understand it. It is not technology. It is something in between, a biological connection to the fundamental energy of reality itself. And now, it will be ours." The device activated, and Kale screamed. They didn't kill him, that would have been wasteful. Instead, they used him as a template, a living blueprint. The device extracted his midi-chlorians by the billions, replicated them, modified them, and then infused them directly into the prior's own cellular structures. It was agonizing for Kale, feeling his connection to the Force being siphoned away, copied, perverted. He could sense through the Force what was happening. The priors were changing, their already formidable power merging with something they had never possessed before. When it was over, Kale collapsed, barely conscious, his force sensitivity diminished but not destroyed. The priors, however, stood transformed. The lead prior raised his hand, and the air itself seemed to ignite. Force lightning crackled from his fingertips, but it wasn't the wild, chaotic energy that Sith Lords wielded. This was controlled, precise, a weapon that could be shaped and directed with surgical accuracy. The prior gestured, and the medical device at the chamber's center disassembled itself, each component floating apart and reassembling into a new configuration without anyone touching it. Extraordinary, the prior breathed, his eyes now glowing with both white light and the subtle shimmer that marked force sensitivity. The Ori's power and the Force, united in one vessel. We are no longer merely their servants, we are their avatars, wielding the full spectrum of reality's energy. Another prior stepped forward, extending both hands toward a section of the chamber's wall. The metal began to reshape itself, flowing like water, forming intricate patterns and structures that defied conventional physics. This wasn't just telekinesis. It was matter manipulation on a fundamental level, the Force being used not just to move objects but to rewrite their molecular composition. A third prior closed his eyes, and suddenly, everyone in the chamber could feel it. A wave of presence expanding outward through the Force, touching every living being on Felucia, brushing against their minds with terrifying gentleness. Somewhere in Kwaitio, Kale's mother gasped as she felt that touch, felt the overwhelming certainty that something godlike was watching her, knowing her, judging her. The Jedi used the Force to maintain peace, the lead prior said, looking down at Kale with something that might have been pity. The Sith used it to dominate and destroy. Both philosophies were limited by their narrow understanding. But we see the truth now, the Force is not light or dark. It is a tool, and in the hands of the Ori's chosen, it becomes an instrument of divine will. The prior raised his staff, and Kale felt himself lifted gently into the air, cradled by invisible energy that no longer felt cold or hostile but warm, almost comforting. It was the most terrifying thing he'd experienced yet. Not because it hurt, but because it felt right, felt like the Force was meant to be used this way. You have served the Ori well, Kale Vosric. Your sacrifice will be remembered when this galaxy kneels before the true gods. Sleep now. When you wake, your mother will be safe, and you will have a choice: accept the Ori's truth, or be returned to your world with no memory of what transpired here. Either way, your gift has already changed the course of history. The prior lowered his staff, and Kale's world faded to black. When he woke, he was back in Kwaitio, lying in his own bed, his mother weeping with relief beside him. He had been gone for 3 days, and she had been certain she'd never see him again. Kale tried to tell her what happened, but the memories were fragmented, dreamlike. He could remember the chamber, the device, the pain, but the specifics blurred together like a nightmare fading in morning light. What he couldn't forget was the feeling. That terrible, seductive warmth of the Force being wielded by something that called itself divine. And when he reached out with his own diminished connection, trying to sense what the priors were doing now, he felt them across the galaxy like blazing stars, their power magnified 1,000-fold. The Ori had the Force now. And they were hunting for more Force sensitives, building an army of hybrid warriors who could wield both technological supremacy and the galaxy's most fundamental power. Across the mid-rim, on 12 different worlds, Force-sensitive individuals felt a disturbance unlike anything they'd experienced before. It wasn't the cold presence of the dark side or the serene calm of the light, it was something alien, something wrong. Jedi survivors came out of hiding, sensing the threat. Former Inquisitors who had abandoned the Empire after Palpatine's death felt the disturbance and knew that something worse than the Emperor had arrived. And on the hidden moon of Ashland IV, where a small enclave of Jedi survivors had been living in secret for years, Master Chu Ron stood in the meditation chamber and opened his eyes with absolute certainty. Something has learned to use the Force that was never meant to wield it, he said to his apprentices, his voice grave. And it hungers for more. On Coruscant, in the ruins of the Jedi Temple that the Empire had long ago converted into the Imperial Palace, a group of scavengers broke through a sealed chamber and discovered something that made them immediately call their New Republic contacts. Inside the chamber, holocrons, dozens of them, ancient Jedi teaching devices that had somehow survived the Purge, were glowing with warning light, activating spontaneously for the first time in decades. When New Republic archaeologists arrived and activated one of the holocrons, the image of a long-dead Jedi Master appeared, his expression troubled. If this message is being received, then something has triggered the temple's ancient defenses, a warning system designed to alert the Order to existential threats. Whatever has activated this protocol is not merely a danger to the Jedi, but to the Force itself. Seek out the Chosen One's heir. Only through Skywalker can balance be maintained. The message repeated 3 times and then the holocron went dark, its power finally exhausted after holding that single warning for 20 years. New Republic intelligence immediately flagged the message for Mon Mothma, who in turn sent an urgent transmission to Tatooine, where Luke Skywalker had been attempting to locate ancient Jedi texts in the ruins of Ben Kenobi's home. The message was simple: Luke, we need you on Chandrila immediately. Something's happened. Something involving the Force. Please come home. But by the time Luke received that message and began preparations to leave Tatooine, the Ori had already moved on from Felucia. Their warships, now carrying 6 priors who wielded the Force with terrifying proficiency, set course for Imperial space. They had what they needed to understand the galaxy's power, now they needed to claim it. And Moff Sarkhan, aboard the Unyielding Doctrine, was already opening communications with other Imperial commanders, spreading the word of the Ori's arrival, preparing the ground for conversion. The Empire, fractured and desperate, would be remarkably easy to turn. All they needed was a demonstration of power and a promise of restored glory. The Ori were about to give them both. In his meditation chamber aboard his flagship, Darth Vader felt the disturbance through the Force like a physical blow. His breathing apparatus cycled rapidly as he processed what he was sensing: multiple Force-sensitive presences, powerful but corrupted, twisted by something that felt utterly alien. They were moving through Imperial space, and wherever they went, he felt minds bending, wills breaking, a wave of conversion spreading like disease. Set course for the Atreus sector, Vader commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Maximum speed. Something is attempting to corrupt the Empire, and I will not allow it. His bridge crew scrambled to obey, not knowing that their Dark Lord was about to face enemies who had already surpassed him in raw power. Vader believed himself the master of the dark side, the most powerful force wielder in the galaxy now that the Emperor was dead. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The Executor II emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Atreus sector with the predatory grace of an apex predator entering new hunting grounds. At 19 kilometers in length, the Super Star Destroyer was a monument to Imperial engineering, a warship so massive that entire fleets had broken against its shields, so heavily armed that it could reduce planets to molten slag. Darth Vader stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, his presence a palpable weight that made even veteran officers move with careful precision. "Report," Vader commanded, his respirator punctuating the word with its mechanical rhythm. "My lord," the sensor officer replied, his voice steady despite the fear that always accompanied addressing the Dark Lord directly. "We're detecting 3 unknown vessels in orbit around Atreus Prime. Configuration matches reports from Jindine and Felucia, golden hulls, pyramidal design, approximately 3 kilometers each. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, but the transmission isn't standard comm protocol. It's interfering with our systems, Lord Vader. Several crew members have reported hearing voices." Vader's gaze fixed on the viewport, where the 3 Ori warships hung against the blue-green curve of Atreus Prime like jewels suspended in the void. Even from this distance, he could feel them through the Force, not as ships, but as focal points of energy that radiated power in ways he'd never encountered. They weren't dark side presences, but they weren't light side either. They were something else entirely, something that made his cybernetic systems fluctuate slightly, as if his own connection to the Force was being observed. "Open a channel," Vader ordered. "Tell them they are trespassing in Imperial space and will submit to boarding or be destroyed." The communications officer worked his console, then frowned. "My lord, the channel is open, but they're not responding through standard comm." Instead, the voice filled the bridge, bypassing every speaker, echoing directly inside the skull of every living being aboard the Executor II. Officers clutched their heads, stormtroopers in the corridors staggered, and even Vader felt the intrusion, a presence pressing against his mind with the subtlety of a vibroblade. Darth Vader. The Sith Lord who serves a dead master. The broken man encased in a machine, clinging to power he no longer understands. "We have heard of you. We have seen your deeds through the memories of those we have enlightened. You believe yourself a master of the Force, but you are a child playing with energies you cannot comprehend." Vader's respirator cycled faster, his anger building like a storm. "You dare to lecture me about the Force? I have destroyed Jedi Masters. I have bent entire systems to my will. I am the Dark Lord of the Sith, and you are insects pretending at divinity." The voice that responded carried amusement, and that infuriated Vader more than any insult could have. "Then come, Darth Vader. Come to our vessel. Face us, if you believe yourself our equal. We will show you what true power looks like, the power of the Ori, combined with the very Force you claim to master. Come alone, and we will not harm your crew. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why resistance to the Ori is futile." One of the Ori warships pulsed with golden light, and the Executor II's shields flared as something, not a weapon, but pure energy, washed over the Super Star Destroyer. Every system flickered. Lights dimmed. The artificial gravity fluctuated for 3 seconds that felt like an eternity. And when everything stabilized, the bridge crew stared at their displays in disbelief. "Lord Vader," the tactical officer reported, his voice barely controlled. They just scanned us. Complete structural analysis, deck by deck, system by system. Our shields didn't even register it as an attack. It just passed through." Vader stood motionless, his mask hiding the fury on what remained of his face. He reached out through the Force, extending his awareness toward the Ori warships, and what he found made his mechanical heart rate spike. There were 6 presences aboard those vessels, 6 beings who radiated Force energy like blazing suns, but their power felt wrong, corrupted not by the dark side but by something foreign. It was as if someone had taken the Force itself and filtered it through an alien philosophy, twisting it into something it was never meant to be. And beneath that, he sensed something else. Fear. Not from the Ori, but from the planet below. Thousands of minds, crying out in terror and confusion as conversion spread through the population like wildfire. He felt the moment when resistance broke, when individuals surrendered their will and embraced whatever truth the Ori offered. It reminded him of Order 66, of feeling the Jedi die across the galaxy, except this time the deaths were spiritual rather than physical. "Prepare my shuttle," Vader said, his voice cold as the void. "I will face these false gods personally." "My lord," Admiral Kendall ventured carefully, "perhaps we should call for reinforcements." "I need no reinforcements to deal with heretics." Vader turned, his cape sweeping dramatically. "If I do not return within 1 hour, you will open fire with all weapons. Destroy those vessels, even if it means sacrificing Atreus Prime. These Ori will learn that the Empire does not tolerate threats, and the dark side answers to no one." 20 minutes later, Vader's shuttle approached the lead Ori warship, and as it crossed into the vessel's docking bay, even the Dark Lord of the Sith felt a moment of, not fear, but wariness. The bay was cavernous, easily large enough to hold a dozen Imperial shuttles, and its walls glowed with that same golden light that seemed to be the Ori's signature. The air itself felt charged, humming with energy that made his suit's systems compensate automatically. 6 figures waited for him at the bay's center, the priors, their white and gold robes pristine, their staffs planted before them. As Vader's ramp descended and he strode forward, his boots echoing in the vast space, he noticed something that made him pause mid-step. Their eyes glowed white, yes. But also, crackling around their temples and fingertips, he saw the telltale blue-white energy of Force lightning. These weren't just alien invaders with advanced technology. They had somehow acquired the Force, learned to wield it, and from what he could sense, they wielded it with a proficiency that should have taken decades to develop. "Darth Vader," the central prior said, lowering his hood to reveal a face that was human but transformed, skin almost luminescent, eyes blazing with that unnatural light. "We are honored. The galaxy's greatest living warrior comes to challenge us. But before we begin this confrontation, answer us one question: do you truly believe the dark side makes you powerful? Or have you simply never encountered anything genuinely divine?" Vader didn't waste time with words. He extended his hand, reaching out through the Force with the full weight of his dark side mastery, and crushed. It was a technique he'd used to collapse the throats of admirals, to shatter the bones of Jedi masters, to demonstrate that his power was absolute and unchallengeable. The prior didn't even flinch. The Force pressure that should have crushed his windpipe simply stopped, halted by an invisible barrier that Vader's power couldn't penetrate. The prior smiled. Impressive technique. The ability to manipulate molecular bonds through focused dark side energy. But you're using the Force as a blunt instrument, Vader. We have learned to wield it as a scalpel. The prior raised his staff, and suddenly Vader was lifted off the deck, not violently, but effortlessly, as if gravity had simply ceased to apply to him. He struggled, channeling the dark side to break free, but the hold was absolute. And then the prior did something that should have been impossible. The prior reached out through the Force, not to attack Vader's body, but to touch his mind. Vader felt the intrusion, felt this being attempting to bypass his mental defenses and access his thoughts directly. The Dark Lord had been trained by Emperor Palpatine himself in mental fortification. His mind was a fortress, layered with dark side barriers that had turned aside Jedi mind tricks and even the Emperor's occasional probing. The prior tore through those defenses like tissue paper. Suddenly, Vader was seeing, not through his own eyes, but through the prior's perception. He saw himself as the prior saw him, a broken shell of a man, more machine than organic, clinging to the dark side because it was all he had left after losing everything at Mustafar. He saw his own rage as pitifully small, a candle flame compared to the inferno of power the Ori commanded. He saw his entire philosophy, the Sith code, the rule of two, the idea that power came through passion and domination, as the limited understanding of beings who had never encountered true divinity. Vader screamed, the sound distorted by his respirator, and channeled every ounce of dark side energy he possessed. Force lightning erupted from his fingertips, something he rarely did, given the risk to his suit, and the blue-white energy crackled toward the prior with enough power to kill a dozen men. The prior caught the lightning in his bare hand, absorbed it, and then sent it back amplified tenfold. The energy struck Vader's suit, and every system went haywire. His respirator stuttered. His cybernetic limbs locked up. Pain, real, physical pain that his suit normally dulled, flooded through his ruined body. He collapsed to the deck, gasping, his breathing ragged as backup systems struggled to compensate. "You see," the prior said, approaching slowly, his staff tapping against the deck with each step. "The Force is not yours to command, Vader. It is a gift from the Ori, channeled through those worthy of wielding it. You have spent decades mastering techniques that we learned in days, because we understand what you do not, the Force is not dark or light. It is a tool, and tools serve those with the wisdom to use them properly." Another prior stepped forward, and Vader felt himself lifted again, this time by multiple Force users working in concert. They didn't just hold him, they examined him, using the Force to scan his cybernetics, his organic remains, his connection to the dark side. It felt like being dissected while still conscious, every secret laid bare. "Fascinating," the second prior murmured. "His midi-chlorian count is extraordinarily high, even diminished by his injuries. But his connection is corrupted, twisted by anger and pain. He uses suffering as a conduit to power, burning himself from within. Inefficient, but effective given his limitations. We could heal him," a third prior suggested. "Restore his body, show him what the Ori can offer. Imagine Darth Vader, whole again, wielding the Force without the limitations of that suit. He would be unstoppable." Vader's eyes widened behind his mask. They could heal him. Restore what Mustafar had taken. For one terrible moment, he felt something he'd thought long dead, hope. And then he crushed it, recognizing it for what it was, temptation, the same kind of seduction the Emperor had used to turn him against the Jedi. "I will never serve you," Vader gasped, each word an effort through his damaged respirator. The lead prior knelt beside him, and his voice was genuinely sympathetic. "We do not ask you to serve us, Vader. We ask you to serve the Ori, the true gods of all creation. Your empire is broken. Your master is dead. Your philosophy has led you only to pain and imprisonment in that mechanical shell. But it doesn't have to end this way. Accept the Ori's truth, and you will be reborn, not as a servant, but as a holy warrior, spreading enlightenment across the galaxy. The dark side is all I need," Vader replied, struggling to rise, his servos whining with effort. "The dark side is a crutch," the prior said, standing. "And you will learn that lesson, one way or another. For now, you will witness what happens to those who resist the Ori's truth." The prior raised his staff, and the walls of the docking bay became transparent, or perhaps ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. Vader found himself staring out at a Travis Prime, the planet's surface visible below. And as he watched, golden beams of light descended from the two other Ori warships, touching down in major population centers. Through the Force, Vader felt what happened next. Millions of minds, touched by those beams, suddenly overwhelmed with the certainty that the Ori were divine, that resistance was not just futile but wrong, that accepting their truth was the only path to salvation. He felt people's wills breaking, not through torture or fear, but through an overwhelming sense of religious ecstasy that bypassed rational thought entirely. A Travis Prime, a world of 8 million Imperial citizens, converted in less than 10 minutes. This is what awaits every world in your galaxy, the Prior said quietly. Enlightenment, whether willing or not. You can fight us, Vader. You can throw everything the Empire has at us. But in the end, you will kneel. They all will. The only question is how many must suffer before the galaxy accepts the inevitable. The Prior gestured, and Vader felt himself telekinetically dragged toward his shuttle, his protests meaningless against the overwhelming force power arrayed against him. Return to your ship, Dark Lord. Tell your Empire what you have witnessed here. Tell them that the Ori are coming, and that their false gods, their Emperor, their Sith, their Jedi, were never gods at all. Only the Ori are worthy of worship. Only the Ori can save them from the chaos that has consumed this galaxy for millennia. Vader was thrown into his shuttle, the ramp closing automatically. The last thing he saw before the shuttle launched was the 6 Priors standing in formation, their staffs raised, their eyes blazing with the combined power of Ori technology and the stolen force. And through their connection, he felt their certainty, absolute, unshakable conviction that they were right, that they were divine instruments of a higher power. The shuttle rocketed back toward the Executor 2, and Vader lay on the deck, his suit slowly rebooting, his breathing gradually stabilizing. But something had broken inside him, not his body, which was already broken, but his certainty. For the first time since Mustafar, since choosing the dark side, Darth Vader felt something he thought himself incapable of experiencing. Doubt. When he finally staggered onto his bridge, his crew stared in shock at their normally invincible commander, his armor scorched, his movements unsteady. Admiral Kendall started to speak, but Vader silenced him with a raised hand. Send a priority transmission to all Imperial forces, Vader commanded, his voice strained. Code Black. Existential threat to the Empire. Unknown enemy possesses technology and force abilities beyond our current capability to counter. All fleets are to converge on Coruscant. We cannot fight them scattered. We must unite, or we will fall one system at a time. My lord, Kendall ventured carefully, what are we facing? Vader stared at the viewport, watching the Ori warships begin their departure from Atravis, already moving toward their next target. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight his crew had never heard before, not anger, but something far more dangerous. Fear. Gods, Vader said simply. We are facing gods. And I do not know if we can stop them. The Imperial remnant had fractured into 17 major factions after the Battle of Endor, each commanded by warlords, moffs, and grand admirals who claimed legitimacy as the Emperor's true successors. They had spent the past year fighting each other as much as they fought the New Republic, squabbling over territory and resources while their empire crumbled around them. But when Darth Vader's Code Black transmission reached them, authenticated with his personal encryption codes and carrying the weight of genuine desperation, something unprecedented happened. They listened. Within 72 hours, 12 of the 17 factions had converged on Coruscant. Star destroyers from across the galaxy formed a defensive perimeter around the throne world, creating the largest concentration of Imperial military power since the Second Death Star. Grand Admiral Pelion arrived with his entire fleet. Moff Sarken brought the unyielding doctrine and his converted forces, though no one yet realized what had happened to him. Admiral Dalla emerged from the deep core with 4 of the Emperor's hidden star destroyers. Even High Admiral Teradoc, who had been preparing to declare himself Emperor, put aside his ambitions when he saw Vader's transmission. The holographic recording showed the Dark Lord in a state none of them had ever witnessed, damaged, vulnerable, and genuinely shaken. His armor bore scorch marks, his breathing was more labored than usual, and when he spoke, there was no bravado, no threats. Only grim assessment. I have faced the enemy that calls itself the Ori, Vader's recorded voice stated. They possess technology that renders our weapons ineffective. They wield the Force with a proficiency I cannot match. They convert entire populations within hours, not through fear, but through religious certainty that bypasses rational resistance. I engaged them directly and was defeated. If we do not unite immediately, the empire will fall, not through conquest, but through conversion. Every world they touch becomes theirs, and they are moving toward the core. The transmission ended, and the assembled Imperial command staff sat in stunned silence in what remained of the Imperial Palace's war room. Grand Admiral Pelion, the highest-ranking officer present and the closest thing the Empire had to a legitimate Supreme Commander, looked around the table at faces that ranged from skeptical to terrified. Darth Vader does not exaggerate threats, Pelion said carefully. If he says he was defeated, then we are facing something genuinely unprecedented. The question is, what do we do about it? We fight, Admiral Dalla said immediately, her voice hard. We throw everything we have at these Ori. Concentrate our firepower on one of their ships, overwhelm it with sheer numbers. They may have superior technology, but quantity has a quality all its own. Agreed, said Moff Tan Nez, commander of the Crimson Command Fleet. We've faced impossible odds before. The rebellion defeated 2 Death Stars with inferior forces. We can. The rebellion had the Force on their side, a new voice interrupted, and everyone turned to see Moff Sarkhan standing in the doorway, his white uniform pristine, his expression serene. They had Skywalker, they had luck, they had hope. What do we have? A fractured empire, depleted resources, and commanders who would rather fight each other than unite against the real threat. Pelion frowned. Sarkhan, you're late. We were about to discuss deployment strategies for. Deployment strategies are irrelevant, Sarkhan said, walking calmly to the table and placing both hands on its surface. Because there is no strategy that will allow us to defeat the Ori through military force. I know. I've met them. I've seen what they can do. And I've come to tell you all that there is only one rational response to their arrival. The room fell silent. Admiral Dalla's hand moved subtly toward her sidearm. Grand Admiral Pelion's eyes narrowed. What are you saying, Moff Sarkhan? Sarkhan smiled, and his eyes, just for a moment, flashed with that telltale white glow. I'm saying that the Ori are not our enemies. They are our salvation. Everything the Empire tried to accomplish, order, stability, unity across the galaxy, the Ori can achieve. They offer us a chance to rebuild, stronger than before, backed by genuine divine power. All they ask in return is that we acknowledge the truth, they are gods, and we are their servants. Pelion stood slowly, his hand now openly resting on his blaster. You've been compromised. Security, detain Moff Sarkhan immediately. But the stormtroopers who moved to obey hesitated, their weapons wavering. Sarkhan hadn't moved, hadn't made any threatening gesture, yet something in the air had changed. The Moff's presence seemed to expand, filling the room with a pressure that made it difficult to think clearly. I have not been compromised, Grand Admiral. I have been enlightened. The Ori showed me truths that the Emperor never could. They healed my doubts, gave me purpose, and offered me a vision of what the Empire could become. And now, I offer that same gift to all of you. Sarkhan raised his hand, and the lights in the war room flickered. Not from technological interference, but from something far more primal, the Force itself, channeled through someone who should not have been able to wield it. The air shimmered, and suddenly, everyone in the room could see what Sarkhan was seeing, visions of the Empire reborn, star destroyers painted gold and white, stormtroopers serving as holy warriors, a galaxy united not through fear but through genuine belief in a higher power. This is what the Ori offer, Sarkhan said, his voice taking on that same resonant quality the priors possessed. Purpose. Unity. Power that doesn't fade or corrupt. Join them willingly, and you will be elevated. Resist, and you will be left behind as the galaxy moves into a new era. Grand Admiral Pelion drew his blaster and fired in one smooth motion. The bolt should have struck Sarkhan in the chest at point-blank range, but it stopped midair, frozen centimeters from the Moff's body, the the superheated plasma suspended impossibly in space. Sarken gestured almost lazily, and the bolt redirected itself into the ceiling, leaving a smoking crater in the decorative stonework. "I did not come here to fight you," Sarken said, lowering his hand. "I came to offer you a choice. The Ori fleet will arrive at Coruscant within 48 hours. When they do, you can either greet them as liberators, or you can be the next demonstration of why resistance is futile. I have already sent word to the priors. They know this fleet is here. They know you're planning to resist. And they are pleased, because your defeat will prove to the entire galaxy that even the Empire's mightiest forces are nothing before the Ori's power. Get out," Pelion said, his voice cold fury. "Get off this planet before I have you executed for treason." Sarken inclined his head respectfully. "As you wish, Grand Admiral. But know this, I will be aboard the Ori flagship when it arrives. And when you kneel before the priors, begging for mercy after your fleets have been reduced to debris, I will be there to welcome you into the fold. Hallowed are the Ori." The Moff turned and walked calmly from the war room, and no one tried to stop him. The stormtroopers who had hesitated earlier now stood completely still, their weapons lowered, and when Pelion barked orders at them, they didn't respond. They simply watched Sarken leave, their body language suggesting not confusion, but contemplation. After Sarken's departure, the war room erupted into chaos. Officers shouted over each other, some demanding immediate military action, others suggesting retreat to the unknown regions, a few even quietly wondering if Sarken might be right. Admiral Dalla slammed her fist on the table, demanding silence. "We do what the Empire has always done," she declared. "We fight. We show these Ori that humanity doesn't bow to alien gods. We show them that the Empire is stronger than their mind tricks and their parlor tricks. We..." The door burst open, and a naval lieutenant stumbled in, his face pale. "Grand Admiral Pelion, sir, we have a problem. Moff Sarken's fleet just jumped to hyperspace, and 7 other Imperial vessels went with him. We're reading mutinies on 3 star destroyers, crew members refusing orders and demanding to join the Ori. And we're receiving transmissions from Quat Drive yards. The workers they're saying the Ori have shown them truth. They're refusing to produce military equipment unless it's for the Ori's use." Pelion closed his eyes briefly, processing the nightmare unfolding around him. The Ori hadn't even arrived at Coruscant yet, and already they were tearing the Empire apart from within. Sarken's conversion hadn't been an isolated incident, he'd been spreading the Ori's message through covert channels, preparing the ground for their arrival. "How many ships do we have that we're certain haven't been compromised?" Pelion asked quietly. The lieutenant consulted his datapad, his hands shaking. "Maybe 60% of the fleet, sir. The rest are showing signs of divided loyalty or have stopped responding to command codes entirely. 60%. Against an enemy that had defeated Darth Vader in single combat and could convert entire worlds with religious broadcasts." Pelion looked around the table at his fellow commanders and saw the same calculation playing out behind their eyes. This wasn't a war they could win through conventional means. "Where is Lord Vader now?" Pelion asked. "In his meditation chamber, sir. He hasn't emerged since returning from Atravis. His medical droids report his injuries are healing, but he's changed. More withdrawn than usual." Pelion nodded slowly. "Send a message to the New Republic. Priority channel, maximum encryption. Tell them we need to discuss a temporary ceasefire. We have a mutual enemy, and neither of us can afford to keep fighting each other while the Ori are converting the galaxy." "Sir, the Empire doesn't negotiate with terrorists," Admiral Dalla protested. "The Empire is about to cease existing if we don't adapt," Pelion shot back. "Mon Mothma is reasonable. If we can convince her that the Ori are a threat to everyone, maybe, just maybe, we can pool our resources and find a way to fight back." But even as he said it, Pelion knew how desperate it sounded. The Empire and the New Republic, bitter enemies for years, suddenly allying against space gods who wielded the Force and commanded technology that made star destroyers look primitive? It was madness. It was also their only chance. On the other side of the galaxy, on Chandrila, Mon Mothma received Pelian's transmission with a mixture of suspicion and concern. The New Republic Council convened an emergency session, and for 3 hours, they debated whether this was a trick, a trap, or a genuine plea for help from a dying empire. Princess Leia Organa, serving as the New Republic's chief of state, listened to the arguments from both sides and then made a decision that would define her political career. "We meet with them," she said firmly. "Not because we trust the Empire, but because if even half of what they're reporting is true, we can't afford to ignore it. These Ori have already converted multiple Imperial worlds, defeated Darth Vader, and are moving toward the core. If they reach Coruscant and control the Empire's remaining fleets, they'll have the military power to threaten the entire galaxy. We need to know what we're facing, and we need to coordinate our response." "And if it's a trap?" one senator asked. Leia's expression hardened. "Then we'll deal with it. But my instincts tell me Pelian is sincere. The Empire wouldn't admit weakness unless they were truly desperate. And desperate enemies sometimes make the best temporary allies." The vote was close, but eventually, the council agreed. A meeting would be arranged on neutral ground. The planet Bothui, equidistant from Coruscant and Chandrila. Representatives from both sides would attend, and for the first time since the Clone Wars, the galaxy's two major powers would sit at the same table not to negotiate surrender, but to discuss survival. But neither the Empire nor the New Republic knew that they were already too late. The Ori fleet, now numbering 12 warships, reinforced by vessels from their home galaxy, was moving through hyperspace at speeds that shouldn't have been possible, somehow bypassing the limitations of standard hyperdrive technology. They had already claimed 37 star systems, converted 200 billion sentients, and absorbed the military might of 4 Imperial warlord factions. Moff Sarkin's unyielding doctrine now flew in formation with Ori warships, its hull repainted in gold and white, its crew fanatically devoted to their new gods. And aboard the lead Ori warship, the 6 Force-enhanced priors stood in a circular chamber, their hands joined, their eyes blazing as they channeled both Ori power and the Force in unprecedented synchronization. They were performing a ritual, one that would demonstrate their divine nature beyond any doubt. They were reaching out through the Force, touching every Force-sensitive being in the galaxy simultaneously, sending a single message that bypassed all defenses, all mental shields, all attempts at resistance. The Ori are coming. Kneel, or be consumed. Across the galaxy, Jedi survivors screamed and collapsed. Former Inquisitors felt the message like a spike through their skulls. Force-sensitive children woke from nightmares, crying for parents who couldn't understand what was happening. And in his meditation chamber aboard the Executor II, Darth Vader felt the message and knew, with absolute certainty, that his code black warning had come too late. The Ori weren't just invading the galaxy. They were rewriting it, one mind at a time, and no amount of military power would stop them. The only hope. The only possible counter to beings who wielded both technology and the Force as divine instruments, would be someone equally powerful, equally connected to the Force, but uncorrupted by the Ori's influence. Someone like Luke Skywalker. And as if responding to that thought, Vader felt a familiar presence through the Force, his son, finally arriving at Chandrila, finally answering the New Republic summons. Luke was coming, and with him came the one thing the galaxy desperately needed. Hope. Luke Skywalker arrived on Chandrila in the early morning hours, his X-Wing touching down at the New Republic's primary landing facility with the practiced ease of a pilot who'd flown through the Death Star's trenches. R2-D2 beeped anxiously from the astromech socket, his sensors detecting the unusual security presence, dozens of armed guards, military personnel moving with urgent purpose, and an atmosphere of barely controlled panic that even a droid could recognize. "I feel it too, R2, Luke said quietly, popping the canopy and climbing down. Something's very wrong. He'd felt it for days now, ever since leaving Tatooine. The Force had been turbulent, like a calm ocean suddenly struck by competing storm fronts. There were ripples in it, distortions that made meditation difficult and left him with persistent headaches. And 3 days ago, he'd experienced something that still haunted him, a voice, alien and overwhelming, speaking directly into his mind with a message that felt less like communication and more like invasion. The Ori are coming. Kneel, or be consumed. Luke hadn't knelt. He'd lashed out through the Force, pushing back against that intrusion with every technique Obi-Wan and Yoda had taught him, and for a brief moment, he'd felt the presence recoil, surprised that anyone could resist. But then it had withdrawn, and Luke had been left gasping, his head pounding, knowing that whatever had touched his mind was far more powerful than anything he'd encountered before. Luke. Leia's voice cut through his thoughts, and he turned to see his sister running across the landing platform, her diplomatic robes billowing behind her. She threw her arms around him, and through their Force bond, he felt her terror, her exhaustion, and her desperate relief that he was finally here. Leia, what's happening? Luke asked, pulling back to look at her face. She looked older somehow, as if she'd aged years in the weeks since he'd last seen her. Your message said something about the Force, about needing me urgently. Come with me, Leia interrupted, glancing at the guards surrounding them. We're meeting with Imperial representatives in 2 hours, and you need to know everything before then. Luke, the galaxy is in danger. Real danger. Worse than the Empire, worse than the Death Star. These Ori, there. She stopped, struggling to find words, and Luke gently touched her shoulder. Through the Force, he shared what he'd experienced, the voice, the overwhelming presence, the sense of something fundamentally wrong entering the galaxy. Leia's eyes widened. You felt them too, she whispered. Then you know. They're real, they're powerful, and they're converting entire star systems. Luke, they have the Force. Somehow, they learned to use it, and now they're unstoppable. Luke absorbed this information, his mind racing. Tell me everything. Over the next hour, in a secure briefing room deep within the New Republic Senate building, Luke listened as Mon Mothma, Admiral Akbar, and his sister presented the intelligence they'd gathered. Holographic displays showed Ori warships, their golden hulls and pyramidal designs unlike anything in the known galaxy. They showed converted worlds, populations that had gone from resistance to fanatical worship within hours. They showed Moff Sarkin's transformation, his demonstration of Force powers that shouldn't have been possible for someone who wasn't Force sensitive. And then they showed him the recording of Darth Vader's transmission. Luke watched his father, because despite everything, despite Vader's crimes and their complicated history, that's what Vader was, speak with genuine fear. Watched him admit defeat. Watched him call for unity among Imperial forces because facing the Ori alone meant certain destruction. And when the recording ended, Luke sat in silence for a long moment, processing what this meant. Vader wants an alliance, Luke said finally. With us. With the New Republic. Grand Admiral Pelion does, Mon Mothma corrected gently. Vader hasn't left his meditation chamber since returning from his encounter with the Ori. According to Pelion's intelligence, the Dark Lord is changed. Withdrawn. Possibly traumatized by whatever happened aboard that Ori warship. Luke closed his eyes, reaching out through the Force toward his father. The connection was faint, Vader was far away, on Coruscant, but it was there, a familiar darkness that Luke had learned to recognize during their confrontation on the second Death Star. Except now, that darkness felt fractured. Uncertain. As if Vader's absolute conviction in the power of the dark side had been shaken to its foundation. He's afraid, Luke said quietly. I've never felt that from him before. He's always been so certain, so confident in his power. But now, he opened his eyes, looking at Leia. Whatever these Ori did to him, it broke something inside. And if they can break Vader, then we're facing something beyond anything we've prepared for. Which is why we need you, Leia said, leaning forward. Luke, you're the only Jedi left. You're the son of the Chosen One, trained by Masters Kenobi and Yoda. If anyone can stand against these force-wielding Ori, it's you. I'm one person, Luke protested. I've barely begun to understand the Jedi teachings. I don't have an order to back me up, I don't have. You have us, Admiral Akbar interrupted, his gravelly voice firm. The New Republic military, the Imperial forces if Pelion honors this alliance, and every free world that's willing to fight. But we need guidance, Commander Skywalker. We need someone who understands the Force to tell us how to fight an enemy that uses it as a weapon of conversion. Luke stood, pacing to the viewport that overlooked Chandrila's capital. Outside, citizens went about their daily lives, unaware that their entire way of existence was under threat. He thought of Yoda's final words to him, about how he would be the last of the Jedi, responsible for passing on what he'd learned. He thought of Obi-Wan's sacrifice, of his father's fall to the dark side, of all the Jedi who had died believing they were protecting the galaxy. And he thought about the voice that had invaded his mind, the absolute certainty it had carried, the overwhelming wrongness of it. I'll help, Luke said, turning back to face them. But I need to understand what we're dealing with first. These Ori, they're not from this galaxy, are they? They're not Sith, they're not dark side users in any traditional sense. They're something else entirely. We believe they're extragalactic invaders, Mon Mothma confirmed, bringing up a star chart that showed the Ori's pattern of conquest. They appeared at the edge of known space 3 weeks ago, moving inward toward the core. Every system they touch either converts willingly or is forcibly converted. No negotiations, no compromise. Just absolute religious certainty that they are gods and that everyone must worship them. And they have the Force now, Luke said, studying the chart. How? The Force isn't something you can just take. It's part of living beings, connected through midi-chlorians. Unless, his eyes widened as the realization hit. They captured Force sensitives. They studied them, extracted their midi-chlorians, and somehow transferred that ability to their own people. That's our theory, Leia confirmed. And if they're doing that, then every Force-sensitive person in the galaxy is a potential target. They're hunting you, Luke. Hunting anyone who can use the Force, because we're resources to them. Power they can harvest and use to make themselves stronger. The door to the briefing room slid open, and a protocol droid entered, its photoreceptors glowing with urgency. Mistress Leia, the Imperial delegation has arrived. Grand Admiral Pelion is requesting the meeting begin immediately. He says the Ori fleet has been detected entering the Coruscant system. They have less than 6 hours before contact. The room fell silent. 6 hours. The galaxy's capital world, defended by the largest Imperial fleet ever assembled, would face the Ori in 6 hours. And if Coruscant fell, if the Empire's heart was converted to worship these false gods, then there would be no stopping them. We meet now, Mon Mothma said, standing. Luke, I know this is sudden, but we need you there. If we're going to convince the Imperials to work with us, they need to see that we have a Jedi on our side. Someone who represents hope, not fear. Luke nodded, straightening his black tunic, the same outfit he'd worn when confronting the Emperor, when saving his father's soul. It seemed appropriate to wear it again now, facing a threat even greater than Palpatine. Let's go. The meeting took place in Chandrila's Grand Hall, a circular chamber with seating for hundreds but currently occupied by only 24 individuals, the key decision-makers from both sides. On one side sat Mon Mothma, Leia, Admiral Akbar, and several New Republic military commanders. On the other sat Grand Admiral Pelion, Admiral Dalla, 3 Imperial Moffs, and a handful of their senior officers. And standing between them, visible through a holographic transmission from Coruscant, was Darth Vader. Luke's breath caught when he saw his father's image materialize. Vader stood rigidly, his hands clasped behind his back, his breathing steady but somehow more labored than usual. The Dark Lord's mask turned slowly, scanning both sides of the chamber, and when his gaze settled on Luke, the younger Skywalker felt a surge of emotion through the Force, recognition, shame, fear, and something that might have been pride. "Commander Skywalker," Vader said, his voice its usual mechanical rasp but lacking its typical authority. "You have grown stronger in the Force since our last encounter." "Father," Luke acknowledged, and the word sent ripples through both delegations. The New Republic attendees knew about Luke's relationship to Vader, but hearing him say it aloud still carried weight. The Imperial officers stiffened, several exchanging glances. "I'm sorry about what happened to you. I felt your fear through the Force." For a long moment, Vader didn't respond. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. "The Ori are unlike anything I have encountered. They have taken the Force, our Force, and twisted it into something that serves their alien philosophy. They are not Sith. They are not Jedi. They are something far more dangerous, because they wield power without the limitations of either philosophy." "Then we need to find their limitations," Luke said firmly. "Every power has a weakness. The Force teaches balance. For every strength, there's a corresponding vulnerability. We just need to find theirs." "Wise words," a new voice said, and everyone turned to see the holographic form of Grand Admiral Pelion step forward. "But wisdom alone won't stop them. We need strategy, resources, and most importantly, we need to stop fighting each other. The Ori are arriving at Coruscant in less than 6 hours. If they convert the Empire's capital, they'll have access to our shipyards, our resources, our military infrastructure. We cannot allow that to happen. What do you propose?" Mon Mothma asked carefully. Pelion took a deep breath, and Luke could sense through the Force how much this next statement cost the proud Imperial officer. "A formal alliance. The Empire and the New Republic, unified against the Ori threat. We pool our fleets, our intelligence, our strategic resources. We stop viewing each other as enemies and start focusing on the real threat." "And when the Ori are defeated?" Admiral Akbar asked, his tone skeptical. "What then? Does the Empire simply return to oppressing the galaxy?" "If the Ori are defeated," Pelion corrected, "we can discuss the political future then. But if we don't survive the next week, that future is irrelevant. Gentle beings, I am a military man. I believe in imperial order, yes, but I also believe in survival. And right now, survival means cooperation." Luke felt Leia's uncertainty through their bond, felt Mon Mothma's careful calculation, felt the distrust emanating from the New Republic commanders who had lost friends and family to imperial aggression. But he also felt something else. The approaching darkness, the sense through the Force that time was running out. "I propose a test," Luke said suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. "Grand Admiral Pelion, you say the Ori are arriving at Coruscant in 6 hours. Let the New Republic send a task force to assist in the defense. Not our entire fleet, neither side should commit everything to this yet. But enough ships to make a difference. If we can fight together at Coruscant, prove that cooperation is possible, then we can discuss a formal alliance. And if the Empire turns on us the moment the battle ends," one of the New Republic admirals demanded. Luke looked at Vader's hologram. "Father, I need your word. Your oath, on whatever honor you have left, that if the New Republic helps defend Coruscant, the Empire won't betray that trust. Can you give me that?" The chamber fell silent. Everyone understood what was happening. Luke Skywalker, the last Jedi, was asking Darth Vader, the Dark Lord of the Sith, to make a promise based on honor. It should have been absurd. It should have been meaningless. But through the Force, Luke felt his father's response, genuine, painful, and absolutely sincere. "You have my word, my son," Vader said quietly. "On my life, on my connection to the Force, on the memory of who I once was. If the New Republic aids us against the Ori, the Empire will honor that alliance. Any commander who violates this oath will answer to me personally." And somehow, everyone in that chamber knew he meant it. The New Republic task force that emerged from hyperspace at Coruscant's edge 3 hours later was modest by galactic standards, 2 MC-80 star cruisers, 4 Nebulan B frigates, and a squadron of X-Wing and A-Wing fighters. But symbolically, it was enormous. For the first time since the Clone Wars ended and the Empire rose, Republic and Imperial forces were fighting on the same side. Luke stood on the bridge of the lead MC-80, the Independence, watching through the viewport as the Imperial fleet came into view. Even knowing what to expect, the sight was staggering. Over 70 Star Destroyers formed a defensive perimeter around Coruscant, their gray hulls bristling with weapons, their formations precise and professional. And at the center, dwarfing even the largest Imperial-class destroyers, sat the Executor II. Vader's flagship, a mobile fortress that represented the Empire's military might made manifest. "Force be with us," Admiral Tara Lency whispered, the Mon Calamari commander of the task force staring at the assembled Imperial power. "I've never seen so many Star Destroyers in one place. If they turn on us." "They won't," Luke said firmly, though he kept one hand near his lightsaber hilt out of habit. Through the Force, he could feel Vader's presence aboard the Executor II, dark and troubled but radiating genuine intent to honor their agreement. "My father gave his word." "Your father is Darth Vader," Admiral Lency pointed out gently. "Forgive my skepticism." Luke couldn't argue with that. Instead, he reached out through the Force, extending his awareness beyond the assembled fleets, searching for the approaching threat. And there, at the edge of his perception, moving through hyperspace with impossible speed, he felt them. The Ori. Their presence in the Force was like nothing he'd encountered, not dark side corruption but something equally disturbing, absolute certainty, unwavering conviction, a religious fervor so intense it burned through the Force like acid. "They're close," Luke said. "Maybe 30 minutes out." The comm station crackled to life, and Grand Admiral Pelian's voice filled the bridge. "New Republic Task Force Independence, this is Imperial Command. We've assigned you defensive positions in Sector 7, supporting the Third Fleet. Welcome to Coruscant. And, thank you for coming." Those last words cost Pelian something. Luke could sense it even across the distance. Imperial pride, battered but not broken, bending to accept help from former enemies. Admiral Lency glanced at Luke, who nodded encouragingly. "Imperial Command, this is Independence." "Acknowledged." "Moving to position." "And Admiral Pelian, we're all on the same side today. Let's make sure Coruscant survives to see tomorrow." As the New Republic ships moved into formation, Luke felt a familiar presence approaching through the Force. He turned toward the bridge entrance just as the blast doors opened, revealing Princess Leia. She'd insisted on coming despite Mon Mothma's protests, arguing that if Luke was risking his life here, she would stand beside him. "The Imperials are twitchy," Leia reported, moving to stand next to her brother. "Our pilots are reporting targeting locks from Imperial fighters, then quick stand-downs when they remember we're allies. This is going to take some getting used to." "We don't have time to get used to it," Luke said, pointing at the tactical display where a sensor officer was highlighting new contacts. "They're coming." The Ori fleet dropped out of hyperspace like the wrath of ancient gods made manifest. 15 warships, each 3 kilometers of golden magnificence, appeared in perfect formation at Coruscant's orbital boundary. They didn't rush forward, didn't immediately attack. They simply existed, hovering there with the patience of beings who knew the outcome was inevitable. And then, as one, they began broadcasting. The transmission wasn't audio or video in any conventional sense. It bypassed communication systems entirely, projecting directly into the minds of every sentient being within range, every officer on every ship, every stormtrooper, every pilot, every civilian on Coruscant's surface. Luke felt it slam into his consciousness like a tidal wave, and only his Jedi training allowed him to maintain mental barriers strong enough to resist. People of Coruscant. Citizens of the Empire. Beings of the New Republic. We are the Ori, and we bring you salvation. For too long, you have lived in darkness, worshipping false idols and serving corrupt masters. Your emperor claimed divinity but was merely a mortal with stolen power. Your Jedi claimed wisdom but brought only war and suffering. But we offer you truth, the genuine protection of divine beings who created all things and demand only your faith in return. On the bridge of the Independence, officers clutched their heads, some crying out in pain, others simply staring into space with expressions of religious awe. Leia staggered, and Luke grabbed her arm, channeling the Force to shield her mind from the overwhelming mental assault. "Don't listen to them," Luke said urgently, his voice cutting through the psychic noise. "They're using the Force to amplify their message, to bypass your rational mind. Remember who you are. Remember what you're fighting for." Leia nodded shakily, her mental defenses strengthening with Luke's help. Around them, the bridge crew slowly recovered, shaking off the effects of the transmission through sheer force of will and training. But Luke could feel through the Force that not everyone was recovering. On some of the Imperial ships, especially those that had been wavering in loyalty, entire crews were falling to their knees, surrendering their will to the Ori's message. The second wave of the transmission came with visual components. The Ori warships projected holographic images into space itself, images that appeared on every viewport, every tactical display, every holoscreen across Coruscant. They showed miracles, priors healing the sick with touches of their staffs, materializing food for the hungry, raising the dead from their graves. They showed the converted worlds, populations living in apparent peace and prosperity, their faces serene, their eyes glowing with that telltale white light. And they showed the alternative. Worlds that had resisted, reduced to lifeless rocks. Populations that had refused conversion, simply erased from existence. It wasn't presented as a threat, it was presented as mercy, as the natural consequence of rejecting divine truth. "This is psychological warfare on a scale we've never encountered," Admiral Lency said, his voice strained. "They're not just attacking our ships, they're attacking our will to fight." "Then we remind them what free will looks like," a new voice said through the comm, and Luke felt a surge of dark determination through the Force. Vader was speaking on an open channel, his words broadcast to every Imperial and New Republic vessel. "This is Lord Vader. I have faced the Ori in personal combat. I have felt their power, seen their so-called miracles. And I tell you now, they are not gods. They are invaders who have stolen the Force, perverted it into a weapon of subjugation. They offer peace through submission, prosperity through worship, salvation through the surrender of everything that makes us who we are. I will not kneel. The Empire will not kneel. And today, we will show them that some powers in this galaxy cannot be converted." For a Sith Lord who had spent decades enforcing Imperial doctrine through fear, Vader's speech was remarkably inspiring. Luke felt the collective response through the Force, Imperial crews steadying themselves, New Republic pilots remembering why they fought, stormtroopers who had begun to waver suddenly gripping their weapons tighter. His father might be a monster, might be responsible for countless atrocities, but in this moment, he was giving people hope. The Ori response was immediate and devastating. All 15 warships fired simultaneously, not with conventional weapons but with those golden beams that had vaporized entire fleets. The beams struck the outer defensive line, 12 Star Destroyers positioned at maximum weapons range, and the ship simply ceased to exist. No explosions, no debris fields, just their one moment gone the next erasure that violated every law of physics and tactics that the assembled forces understood. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Pelian's voice cracked across the command frequency. "Do not let those beams touch you. Focus fire on the lead warship, concentrated turbolaser barrage, now." The Imperial fleet responded with the precision of decades of military excellence. Hundreds of turbolaser batteries opened fire, green bolts of superheated plasma converging on the lead Ori warship from multiple angles. The New Republic ships added their firepower, ion cannons, proton torpedoes, everything they had. The combined barrage represented enough destructive energy to crack a planet's crust. The Ori warship's shields, if they even were shields, absorbed it all without visible strain. The energy simply dissipated against an invisible barrier, cascading harmlessly into space. And then, as if responding to an insult, the warship fired again. This time, the beam swept across space like a sword stroke, and 4 more Star Destroyers vanished. Luke felt the deaths through the Force. Thousands of lives extinguished in an instant, too fast for fear or pain, just sudden absence where presence had been. It was worse than the Death Star's destruction of Alderaan, because this was surgical, precise, and completely unstoppable. "We can't hurt them," Admiral Lency said, his voice hollow. "Our weapons are useless. How do you fight something that can just delete you from existence?" Luke closed his eyes, reaching out through the Force, searching for any weakness, any vulnerability in the Ori's seemingly perfect defense. And there, beneath the overwhelming power, beneath the religious certainty, he felt something. A connection. The Ori priors aboard those warships were channeling the Force to enhance their technology, using midi-chlorians as living conduits to amplify their weapons and shields. It was brilliant, using biology and technology in perfect synchronization. But it was also a vulnerability. "The Force," Luke said, opening his eyes. "They're using the Force to power their defenses. If we can disrupt that connection, even for a moment, their shields might falter." "How do we disrupt the Force?" Leia asked. "We don't have any Jedi except you, and even if you could reach them through the Force, you're one person against 6 priors." Luke looked at his sister, then at the tactical display showing the Executor 2 at the fleet center. "I'm not alone. There's another Force user in this system. Someone powerful enough to match the Ori, if he's willing to try." Leia's eyes widened. "Luke, no. You can't seriously be suggesting." "Open a direct channel to Lord Vader," Luke said to the comm officer, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Tell him I need to speak with him immediately. And tell him his son has a plan, but it requires us to work together through the Force." The comm officer hesitated, glancing at Admiral Lency, who nodded slowly. A moment later, Vader's breathing filled the bridge, that rhythmic mechanical rasp that had haunted the galaxy for decades. "My son," Vader said, and there was something in his voice that Luke had never heard before. "Vulnerability. You wish to battle meld with me. To join our power through the Force as the ancient Jedi once did." "I know what you are," Luke replied. "I know what you've done. But right now, you're also the only other Force user in this system strong enough to help me reach those priors. Together, we might be able to disrupt their connection to the Force long enough for the fleet to damage them. Alone, we'll all die watching Coruscant fall." Silence stretched across the comm channel. Luke could feel his father's internal struggle through the Force, pride warring with pragmatism, the dark side's isolation warring with the memory of who Anakin Skywalker had once been. And then, finally, Vader spoke. "Very well. Open yourself to the Force, Luke. I will do the same. We will show these false gods what real power looks like." Luke settled into a meditation stance on the bridge, ignoring the chaos around him, the battle raging, the ships dying, the Ori advancing. He reached out through the Force, extending his presence toward his father's dark star of power. For a moment, their energies collided, light and dark grinding against each other like tectonic plates. But then, slowly, they found harmony, not merging, but complementing, 2 different expressions of the same fundamental force. And together, father and son reached out toward the Ori warships. The priors felt them coming. Luke sensed their surprise, their sudden wariness as 2 powerful Force presences united and struck at their mental defenses. The Ori had encountered Force sensitives before, had captured them, studied them, harvested their power. But they had never faced 2 Force users working in perfect synchronization, their combined strength magnified by blood ties and desperation. Luke and Vader didn't attack with Force lightning or telekinesis. Instead, they did something more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. They reached into the Ori Prior's connection to the Force and severed it, cutting the flow of midi-chlorian energy that powered their hybrid technology for just 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. All ships, fire now. Pelion roared, and the entire fleet responded instantly. The golden shields flickered, failed, and for the first time, Imperial and New Republic weapons struck Ori hull material directly. The lead warship's graceful lines erupted with explosions as turbolaser fire penetrated, blasting through that liquid metal armor and detonating internal systems. A lucky proton torpedo strike from an X-wing squadron penetrated deep into the warship's superstructure, and suddenly, impossibly, the vessel was bleeding, energy venting from ruptures, atmosphere escaping in glittering clouds. The Ori warship didn't explode. It simply stopped. All power ceased, all movement halted, and the massive vessel began drifting, a 3-kilometer monument to the fact that these invaders, these false gods, could be hurt after all. Luke gasped, breaking the Force connection with his father, and nearly collapsed from exhaustion. Channeling that much power, maintaining that level of concentration while disrupting 6 priors simultaneously, had pushed him to his absolute limit. Leia caught him, supporting his weight, and through their bond, Luke felt her fierce pride mixed with terror at how close he'd come to burning himself out. Did it work? Luke managed to ask. On the tactical display, the remaining 14 Ori warships were pulling back, regrouping, their formation suddenly defensive instead of aggressive. And from the damaged lead warship, escape pods were launching, golden spheres that streaked toward Coruscant's surface, carrying the Ori priors to safety. It worked, Admiral Lency confirmed, his voice filled with wonder. By the Force, it actually worked. We damaged them. We proved they can be beaten. But Luke's relief was short-lived. Through the Force, he felt the Ori prior's response, not retreat, not defeat, but cold calculation. They had learned something valuable from this engagement. There were Force users in this galaxy powerful enough to disrupt their technology. Which meant those Force users needed to be eliminated or converted before the next attack. And on Coruscant's surface, in the heart of the Imperial Palace, Moff Sarkhan smiled as he felt those escape pods approaching. The priors would be safe, would establish a foothold on the capital world itself, and from there, conversion could begin from within. The battle in space had been a setback, yes, but the war for Coruscant was far from over. The 6 golden escape pods struck Coruscant's surface across multiple districts. 1 in the Senate sector, 2 in the industrial manufacturing zones, 1 near the ruins of the Jedi Temple, 1 in the underworld levels, and 1 directly inside the Imperial Palace compound where Moff Sarkhan had conveniently disabled security protocols. Within minutes of landing, each prior emerged from their pod surrounded by an aura of golden light, their staffs raised, their eyes blazing with determination. Luke felt their arrival through the Force like 6 burning stars suddenly igniting on the planet's surface. He was still on the bridge of the Independence, exhausted from the battle meld with Vader, but he forced himself upright, ignoring Leia's protests. "They're on the surface," Luke said, his voice hoarse. "The priors. They're going to convert Coruscant from the ground up while the fleet is occupied with the warships above." Admiral Lency cursed in Mon Calamari. "We can't fight a ground war and a space battle simultaneously. If those priors start converting the population, then Coruscant falls without another shot being fired," Leia finished grimly. "Luke, you need to go down there. You're the only one who can face them." "I can barely stand," Luke protested, though even as he said it, he was already moving toward the exit. "The battle meld drained me. I need time to recover before I can." "There is no time," Vader's voice cut through the comm channel, and Luke realized his father had been listening to their entire conversation. "The priors are already spreading their influence. I can feel it through the Force, minds bending, wills breaking, conversion beginning in the districts where they landed. My son, you must go. And you will not go alone." "Father, what are you?" I am dispatching my personal shuttle to retrieve you from the Independence, Vader continued, and Luke could hear the strain in his mechanical voice, as if this decision was costing him dearly. We will descend to the surface together. The Priors defeated me when I faced them alone. Perhaps together, we can succeed where I failed. The bridge fell silent. Luke felt the weight of what his father was offering. Not just military assistance, but genuine partnership. Darth Vader, the Dark Lord of the Sith, was admitting he needed help. Was choosing to fight alongside his Jedi son instead of attempting to corrupt or destroy him. I'll be ready, Luke said quietly. And Father, thank you. Vader's shuttle arrived at the Independence 15 minutes later, a sleek Lambda-class craft painted in the Dark Lord's signature black. Luke said a hurried goodbye to Leia, who gripped his hand tightly and whispered through their Force bond, "Come back to me. Both of you." The shuttle's interior was as austere as Luke expected, all functionality, no comfort, designed for a being who felt no need for creature comforts. Vader stood in the passenger compartment, his breathing steady, his posture rigid. As Luke entered, he felt his father's presence in the Force more clearly than ever before. Still dark, still twisted by decades of hatred and pain, but also, conflicted. Changed by the encounter with the Ori. The Priors who escaped are spreading across Coruscant, Vader said without preamble, gesturing to a holographic tactical display. Imperial intelligence reports mass gatherings forming around their landing sites. Thousands of citizens, drawn by their Force-enhanced broadcasts. We have perhaps an hour before conversion reaches critical mass and the capital falls from within. 6 Priors, 6 landing sites, Luke observed, studying the display. We can't be everywhere at once. We need to prioritize, which ones pose the greatest immediate threat. Vader highlighted 2 locations, the Imperial Palace and the Senate District. These 2. The Prior at the Palace has allied with Moff Sarken, who has been preparing the Imperial command structure for conversion. If they succeed in converting the remaining Imperial leadership, the entire military apparatus could turn against us. The Prior in the Senate District is targeting government officials and New Republic representatives who are on planet for diplomatic meetings. If the New Republic leadership is compromised. Mon Mothma, Luke breathed, his stomach dropping. She was supposed to be in secure quarters in the Senate building. Leia said they had over a dozen senators still on Coruscant for emergency consultations. Then we divide our efforts, Vader decided. I will go to the Imperial Palace. That is my domain, and I know its corridors better than any living being. You will go to the Senate District and protect your New Republic leadership. We cannot allow either Prior to succeed. What about the other 4 Priors? Luke asked. The Imperial Guard and New Republic ground forces will have to contain them as best they can, Vader replied, and Luke heard the frustration in his voice, the admission that even 2 powerful Force users couldn't be everywhere. We must trust others to handle those threats while we address the most critical targets. The shuttle descended through Coruscant's atmosphere, and Luke moved to stand beside his father at the viewport. Below, the city planet stretched to every horizon, a landscape of towers and canyons of durasteel and transparasteel. Somewhere down there, 6 Priors were rewriting the minds of millions, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Father, Luke said quietly, when we fought together through the Force. I felt something. Conflict inside you. The Ori shook your faith in the dark side, didn't they? Vader was silent for a long moment, his breathing the only sound. Then, they showed me that power alone is meaningless. The Emperor believed himself a god, believed the dark side made him invincible. But he died screaming, betrayed by his own arrogance. The Ori possess power that dwarfs what Palpatine ever achieved, and yet they are not invincible, you and I proved that today. Which means power is not the answer. There must be something else. Something I have forgotten. Balance, Luke said softly. Master Yoda spoke of it. The Force isn't dark or light, it's both, in harmony. The Jedi focused too much on the light and became rigid. The Sith focused too much on the dark and became destructive. But together, working in balance. Together, we damaged a warship that should have been indestructible, Vader finished. I understand, my son. But understanding and achieving balance are different things. The dark side has been my companion for 23 years. I do not know if I can simply set it aside. I'm not asking you to, Luke said, meeting his father's masked gaze. I'm just asking you to remember that there's more to the Force than hatred and pain. You proved that when you saved me from the Emperor. That wasn't the dark side. That was love. Vader turned away, and Luke felt a surge of emotion through their connection, grief, shame, longing for something lost. We are approaching the drop zones. Prepare yourself, Luke. The Priors will not be easily defeated, even weakened by our earlier assault. I know, Luke replied, igniting his lightsaber. The green blade hummed to life, casting its glow across the shuttle's interior. But they're about to learn that the Skywalker family doesn't surrender easily. For the first time Luke could remember, he heard something that might have been a laugh from his father, dark, mechanical, but genuine. No. We certainly do not. The shuttle split apart, becoming two separate drop pods, one heading for the Imperial Palace, the other for the Senate District. Luke gripped the crash webbing as his pod plummeted toward the city below, the Force surging around him, preparing him for the confrontation ahead. He landed in a plaza 3 blocks from the Senate building, the pod's retro thrusters kicking in at the last moment to prevent a fatal impact. The hatch blew open, and Luke emerged into chaos. Thousands of people filled the plaza, all facing the same direction, all walking with the slow, inexorable pace of beings under compulsion. Their eyes glowed faintly white, and they chanted in unison, words in a language Luke didn't recognize, but through the Force, he understood their meaning. Hallowed are the Ori. At the plaza's center, standing atop a fountain that had been converted into a makeshift pulpit, was the Prior. The robed figure stood with arms outstretched, his staff blazing with golden light, and from him radiated a wave of Force energy so powerful it made the air shimmer. He was broadcasting his message directly into the minds of everyone within range, overwhelming their natural resistance, replacing their individual will with absolute certainty that the Ori were divine. Stop! Luke shouted, his voice amplified by the Force, cutting through the chanting. These people aren't choosing to worship you, you're controlling them. The Prior turned, and Luke felt the full weight of his gaze. Up close, the transformation was even more disturbing. This being had been human once, but the infusion of Ori power and stolen midi-chlorians had changed him into something else. Something that existed between mortal and divine, corrupted by absolute conviction. Luke Skywalker, the Prior said, his voice resonating with harmonics that made Luke's teeth ache. The son of the Chosen One. The last Jedi. We have been most curious about you. You disrupted our shields, cost us a warship, demonstrated power we did not expect to find in this galaxy. But tell me, young Jedi, do you truly believe you can stand against the Ori's truth? Against certainty backed by genuine divine power? I don't know what you really are, Luke replied, his lightsaber held in a defensive grip, but you're not gods. You're just beings who stole power that doesn't belong to you and twisted it into a weapon. The Force is about life, about connection. You've turned it into a tool of domination. The Prior's smile was almost pitying. The Force is energy, Skywalker. It has no inherent morality, no purpose beyond what we give it. The Jedi pretended otherwise, claimed the light side was righteous. The Sith embraced darkness and called it strength. But we see the truth, the Force is simply power, and power serves those wise enough to wield it properly. The Ori are wise. The Ori are eternal. And you, child, are alone. He's not alone, a voice called out, and Luke's heart leapt as he saw figures emerging from the Senate building, Mon Mothma, supported by 2 new Republic guards, her face pale but determined. Behind her came a dozen senators, along with what looked like a squad of New Republic commandos. "This is our galaxy, and we will not surrender it to invaders, no matter how powerful you claim to be." The prior's expression hardened. "Then you will serve as an example of what happens to those who refuse enlightenment." He raised his staff, and the fountain beneath him exploded, not with water, but with golden energy that coalesced into a massive barrier, separating Luke from the civilians. The converted population turned as one, their eyes blazing brighter, and began advancing on Mon Mothma's position with the inexorable determination of a tidal wave. Luke leapt, using the force to carry him over the energy barrier, landing between the prior and Mon Mothma's group. His lightsaber swept through the air, deflecting a blast of force lightning that the prior casually threw at him, the energy crackling harmlessly into the pavement. "Commandos, fall back to the Senate building," Luke ordered. "Get Mon Mothma to safety. I'll hold him here." "Luke, you can't," Mon Mothma started to protest. "Go," Luke shouted, and this time his voice carried the force with it, a Jedi mind trick that compelled obedience. The commandos grabbed Mon Mothma and retreated, laying down covering fire that did nothing to slow the advancing converted citizens but bought precious seconds. The prior regarded Luke with renewed interest. "Impressive. You command others with the Force, bend their will to yours. Perhaps you are not so different from us after all, Jedi. There's a difference between suggesting a course of action and rewriting someone's entire identity," Luke shot back, circling the prior warily. Through the Force, he assessed his opponent, powerful, yes, but also exhausted from maintaining the mass conversion effect. The battle in space had drained the priors more than they wanted to admit. "You don't offer choice. You offer slavery dressed up as salvation." "Slavery?" The prior laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "These people are free for the first time in their lives. Free from doubt, from fear, from the chaos of individual will. We have given them purpose, community, certainty. Is that not what all sentients crave? Is that not what your Jedi Order once offered?" "The Jedi taught people to think for themselves," Luke countered, but even as he said it, he wondered. Had the Jedi really been so different? They had taken children, trained them in rigid doctrine, expected absolute obedience to the Council. Perhaps that was why they had failed. Too much control, not enough trust in individual choice. But that was a question for another time. Right now, he had to stop this prior before more minds were enslaved. Luke attacked. His lightsaber struck the prior's staff, and the collision sent shockwaves rippling through the Force. The staff didn't break, it was made of something that could withstand a lightsaber's blade, some material from the Ori's home galaxy. Luke pressed the assault, drawing on every technique Obi-Wan and Yoda had taught him, every lesson learned in combat against Vader and the Emperor. The prior matched him move for move, his staff spinning with impossible speed, channeling both Ori technology and the Force to create barriers of energy that deflected Luke's strikes. But Luke could feel the prior's weakness. Maintaining the conversion field over thousands of minds while fighting was spreading his concentration too thin. If Luke could just push him harder, force him to choose between the conversion and his own survival. Luke reached out through the Force, not to attack, but to touch the minds of the converted citizens. He couldn't free them, he didn't have that kind of power, but he could remind them of who they had been. He projected memories at them through the Force, families, loved ones, individual dreams and hopes. It wasn't enough to break the conversion, but it made the prior's control waver, forced him to devote more energy to maintaining his grip. "Clever," the prior hissed, his staff movements becoming more desperate. "But futile. For every mind you touch, I can convert 10 more. This entire district will be ours within the hour, and then the planet, and then..." His words cut off as Luke's lightsaber found an opening, slashing across the prior's arm. The wound wasn't deep, the prior had augmented his body with the Force, making his flesh more resistant to damage, but it was enough. Blood, glowing faintly gold, dripped onto the plaza's durasteel surface. You bleed, Luke said quietly. Gods don't bleed. The prior's eyes blazed with fury, and he unleashed a wave of force energy that sent Luke flying backward, slamming into a building's facade hard enough to crack the transparisteel. Pain exploded through Luke's ribs, and for a moment, his vision went dark. He heard the prior approaching, heard the tap of his staff against dura steel, heard the converted citizens chanting louder, feeding their master power through their collective faith. And then, cutting through the chanting, Luke heard something else, the hum of a lightsaber. Not his own. A different blade. Red. Darth Vader descended from the sky on a commandeered speeder, his crimson blade already ignited, and landed between Luke and the prior with such force that the dura steel cracked beneath his boots. His breathing filled the plaza, mechanical and ominous, and when he spoke, his voice carried the cold promise of death. You dare threaten my son. That was your final mistake. The prior's confident expression faltered. The Dark Lord. But you should be at the palace, fighting my brother. Your brother is dead, Vader stated flatly. I cut him down 3 minutes ago, along with the traitor Sarken. And now, prior, you will join him. Luke struggled to his feet, using the force to push through the pain, and moved to stand beside his father. Together, their lightsabers, one green, one red, hummed in harmony, light and dark united against a common enemy. The prior looked at them, and for the first time, Luke sensed genuine fear from the being. 2 Skywalkers. The prophecy never mentioned 2. This isn't how it's supposed to. He never finished the sentence. Luke and Vader struck as one, their blades moving in perfect synchronization born from their earlier battle meld. The prior raised his staff to block, channeling every ounce of Ori power and force ability he possessed, but it wasn't enough. Not against the combined might of the Chosen One's bloodline, fighting not as Jedi or Sith but as father and son. Vader's blade sheared through the staff's crystalline top, destroying its power source. Luke's blade followed a heartbeat later, striking true. The prior fell, his eyes dimming from white to empty gray, and as he died, the conversion field collapsed. Across the plaza, thousands of people stumbled, their eyes clearing, their minds their own again. They looked around in confusion and horror, trying to understand what had just happened to them. Luke deactivated his lightsaber and nearly collapsed again, but Vader caught him, supporting his weight with surprising gentleness for someone in full armor. 2 down, Vader said. 4 remain. Can you continue? Luke looked up at his father's mask and nodded, even though every part of his body screamed in protest. We have to. If we stop now. Then we don't stop, Vader agreed. Come, my son. There is still work to do. And together, lit by the glow of emergency lights and the distant fires of a city under siege, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, Sith and Jedi, father and son, turned toward the next battlefield. The industrial sector was burning. Luke and Vader arrived on another commandeered speeder to find 2 city blocks reduced to rubble, factories collapsed, processing plants spewing toxic smoke into Coruscant's artificially maintained atmosphere. 2 priors had converged here, working in tandem, and the devastation they'd caused while converting the worker population was catastrophic. 30,000 souls in this sector, Vader said, his sensors scanning the destruction as their speeder descended. Imperial citizens, working the manufacturing plants that produce equipment for the fleet. If they're converted, the Ori gain access to our industrial infrastructure. And if they're killed resisting, we lose a critical part of our production capacity, Luke added grimly, feeling the chaos through the force. He could sense the 2 priors below. Their presences like twin suns, burning with certainty and power. But he could also sense something else. Resistance. Unlike the Senate Plaza where civilians had little defense against mental domination, the industrial workers were fighting back. Not with weapons. Those had been confiscated by both Empire and New Republic as part of demilitarization efforts, but with sheer stubborn will. These were people who had survived Imperial occupation, who had endured quotas and punishment details and forced labor. They were accustomed to resisting authority, even when that authority claimed divine mandate. "They're holding," Luke said with growing hope. "The priors are trying to convert them, but the workers are resisting longer than civilians did." "Why?" "Because they have practice," Vader replied, and there was something bitter in his voice. "The Emperor's rule was harsh here. These people learned to protect their minds from imperial propaganda, from fear tactics, from the constant pressure to submit. That resistance serves them now, even against enemies I could not defeat alone." Their speeder landed on a platform overlooking the main manufacturing plaza. Below, the two priors stood back to back, their staffs raised, golden energy radiating from them in waves. Around them, workers clustered in small groups, some already converted with glowing eyes, others still fighting, their faces twisted with effort as they struggled against the mental assault. And between the workers and the priors, an unexpected sight, stormtroopers. Two full platoons of Imperial troops had formed a defensive perimeter, their blasters trained on the priors, their white armor scorched and damaged from attempted conversion. They were firing in disciplined volleys, forcing the priors to divide their attention between conversion and defense. "Those are my troops," Vader said, and Luke heard surprise in his father's mechanical voice. "From the 501st Legion, my personal unit. They should have been at the palace." "They followed you here," Luke realized, watching a stormtrooper sergeant coordinate fire patterns while simultaneously helping a converted worker to cover. "They saw you leave with me, saw us working together, and they followed. Father, your soldiers are choosing to fight alongside us." One of the priors turned his attention toward the platform where Luke and Vader stood, and his voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by the Force. "Darth Vader. You killed our brother at the palace. You dare stand against the Ori's chosen, against beings who have transcended mortal limitation. Surrender now, and we will grant you merciful conversion. Resist, and we will erase you and your son from existence." Vader's response was to ignite his lightsaber, the crimson blade casting red light across his black armor. "I have heard threats from Jedi Masters, from Sith Lords, from the Emperor himself. Yours impress me no more than theirs did. You claim transcendence, but you bleed like any mortal. You claim divine mandate, but you hide behind stolen power. You are not gods. You are parasites." The prior's eyes blazed with fury, and he raised his staff toward Vader, but his partner grabbed his arm, stopping him. The second prior spoke, his voice calmer, more calculating. "Brother, do not waste our strength on the Dark Lord. His hatred makes him dangerous, but it also makes him predictable." Instead, the prior's gaze shifted to Luke, and his expression became almost sympathetic. "Young Skywalker. The last Jedi. Your father walks in darkness, has murdered millions in service to his false emperor. Yet you fight beside him. Tell me, do you truly believe he can be redeemed? Or are you simply desperate enough to ally with anyone who can wield a lightsaber?" Luke felt the question like a blade between his ribs. It was the same doubt he'd wrestled with since agreeing to fight alongside Vader. His father was a monster, responsible for atrocities Luke could barely comprehend. Working with him, even temporarily, felt like a betrayal of everything the Jedi stood for. But then he remembered Yoda's final words, "Luke, do not underestimate the powers of the Emperor, or suffer your father's fate you will." His father's fate. Not an inevitability, but a warning. A path that could be changed. "I believe everyone deserves a chance at redemption," Luke said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion and pain racking his body. "Even those who have fallen the farthest. That's what separates me from you. I offer people choice. You demand submission. And that's why you'll lose." The second prior's sympathetic expression vanished, replaced by cold determination. "Then you will die together." How poetic. Both priors struck simultaneously, and this time they weren't holding back. Force lightning erupted from their staffs, not the wild, chaotic energy that Sith Lords wielded, but controlled streams of devastating power that could be precisely directed. The lightning split, targeting Luke and Vader separately, forcing them to defend individually rather than as a unit. Luke's lightsaber became a blur as he deflected the lightning, the green blade absorbing and redirecting the energy into the plaza floor, leaving scorch marks in the dura steel. But the prior was relentless, increasing the intensity with each second, and Luke felt his arms beginning to tire, his connection to the Force straining under the assault. Vader faced similar pressure, his crimson blade moving in tight defensive patterns, his cybernetic limbs allowing for precision and endurance that flesh alone couldn't match. But Luke could feel through their lingering Force connection that his father was struggling. The battle at the palace had drained him more than he'd admitted, and the injuries from his earlier encounter with the Ori still hampered his movements. They were losing. And then, cutting through the Force lightning and the chaos, Luke heard a sound that made his heart leap, the whine of starfighter engines. X-Wings and TIE fighters, flying in formation together, New Republic and Imperial pilots coordinating their attack runs, screamed overhead, strafing the plaza with laser fire. The shots didn't hit the priors directly, the pilots were too skilled to risk civilian casualties. But they forced the priors to divert energy to shields, momentarily reducing the lightning assault. Rogue leader to ground forces, a familiar voice crackled over the local comm frequencies. Thought you could use some air support. We've got birds in the air until those warships up top decide to shoot us down, so use the time wisely. Wedge Antilles. Luke would have laughed if he had breath to spare. His friend had somehow convinced both New Republic and Imperial fighter wings to cooperate, creating a temporary air superiority that gave ground forces a fighting chance. Now, my son. Vader roared, and Luke understood instantly. They attacked together, not as Jedi and Sith, but as Skywalkers. Luke's green blade struck high while Vader's red blade swept low, their movements synchronized through the Force bond that connected them by blood and battle. The priors raised their staffs to block, their combined power formidable, but they had made a critical error. They were accustomed to fighting alone, to individual combat where their overwhelming power could dominate single opponents. They had never faced a battle meld between two Force users who knew each other so intimately. Luke felt his father's intentions a heartbeat before Vader moved, allowing him to adjust his own attack to complement rather than interfere. Vader felt Luke's strategy through their connection, using the younger man's speed and agility to create openings for his own devastating power strikes. They moved as one entity with two blades, and the priors. Despite all their stolen power, despite their divine mandate, couldn't adapt fast enough. Luke's blade slashed through the first prior's staff, destroying its power source in a shower of golden sparks. Vader's blade followed immediately, piercing the prior's chest, and the being fell with a scream that echoed through the Force like the death of a small star. His converted followers stumbled as the mental hold released, their eyes clearing, their own wills returning. The second prior backed away, his confidence finally shaken, his staff raised defensively. Impossible. You're just a broken Sith and an untrained boy. The Ori chose us, empowered us, made us more than mortal. You cannot. The Ori made you arrogant, Vader interrupted, his breathing harsh, his lightsaber unwavering. They gave you power without wisdom, strength without understanding. You believed yourselves invincible because you had never faced real opposition. But we have fought battles you cannot imagine. We have faced enemies that would break your faith. And we do not kneel. The prior tried to flee, turning to run toward the nearest building, but Luke extended his hand, using the Force to freeze the being mid-step. It wasn't mind control, Luke was simply holding the prior's body in place, channeling the Force through exhaustion and pain and sheer determination. The prior struggled, his own Force abilities pushing back, but then Vader added his power to Luke's, and together they held the prior immobile. Stormtroopers, Vader called out, his voice carrying absolute authority. Neutralize the target. Non-lethal if possible. I want this one alive for interrogation. The 501st Legion responded instantly, encircling the paralyzed prior and firing stun bolts at maximum intensity. The blue rings of energy struck the prior repeatedly, and even his enhanced physiology couldn't withstand the cumulative effect. He collapsed, unconscious but alive, and Luke released his force hold, nearly collapsing himself from the effort. Vader caught him again, and this time Luke didn't try to pull away. He leaned against his father's armored shoulder, breathing hard, feeling the ache in every muscle and the burn of overstrained force channels. "For down," Luke managed to say. "Two left." "The remaining two are in the underworld levels," Vader replied, his sensors accessing Imperial tactical networks. "They've retreated into the deep infrastructure, where our forces cannot easily follow. The area is a maze of abandoned tunnels and criminal hideouts. Pursuing them will be dangerous. More dangerous than what we've already done?" Luke asked, summoning a tired smile. Through their force bond, Luke felt something from his father that he'd never experienced before: humor. Grim, dark humor, but genuine nonetheless. "Perhaps not." "Very well, Luke. One final battle. And then? Then perhaps we can discuss what comes after." "What comes after?" Luke turned those words over in his mind as they commandeered yet another speeder, this one equipped with deep-level navigation systems. What did come after? If they survived, if they defeated the remaining priors and drove off the Ori fleet, what happened to the tenuous alliance between the Empire and the New Republic? What happened to Vader, who had committed atrocities but was now fighting to save the galaxy? What happened to Luke, who was supposed to rebuild the Jedi Order but was learning that light and dark weren't as separate as his teachers had believed? But those were questions for later. Right now, they had two more priors to stop, and an entire galaxy depending on them succeeding. The underworld levels of Coruscant were exactly as dark and treacherous as Luke remembered from his brief visits during the war. These were the forgotten depths, kilometers below the glittering surface, where sunlight never reached and law enforcement rarely ventured. Criminals, refugees, and beings who simply wanted to disappear made their homes here, in the shadows of the galaxy's capital. And now, two priors who had fled their defeats above were attempting to convert this desperate population, offering salvation to those who had never known hope. Luke and Vader descended into the darkness, their lightsabers the only illumination beyond sporadic emergency lights. Through the Force, Luke sensed the priors ahead, weakened, frightened, but still dangerous. They had barricaded themselves in an abandoned industrial complex, surrounded by converted underworld dwellers who now served as guards and shields. "They're using the converted as human shields," Luke said, disgust in his voice. "They know we won't cut through innocent people to reach them." "Then we find another way," Vader replied, studying the complex's layout on his helmet display. "There are maintenance tunnels, access shafts, alternate routes. The complex was built during the Old Republic era, I know its design. We can bypass their defenses and strike directly." Luke nodded, following his father through the twisting passages of Coruscant's underbelly. As they moved, he felt something shift in the Force, not danger, but anticipation. As if the Force itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when father and son finally faced the last of their enemies. They emerged in a massive chamber that had once been a power distribution center, now converted into a makeshift temple. The two priors stood at its center, their staffs raised, surrounded by hundreds of converted citizens. And unlike the surface, where conversions had been resisted, these people had accepted the Ori's message willingly. They had been offered purpose, community, hope, things the galaxy had never given them, and they had embraced it. "Skywalkers," the first prior said, and his voice was weary, resigned. "You have killed 4 of our brothers. You have proven yourselves formidable beyond what we expected. But here, you face a choice. These people chose conversion freely. They wanted what we offered. Will you murder them to reach us? Will you prove yourselves no better than the tyrants you claim to oppose?" Luke stopped, his lightsaber lowering slightly. The prior was right, these people had chosen. They hadn't been forced, hadn't been mentally dominated. They had looked at what the Ori offered and said yes. Did that make them enemies? Did that justify violence against them? But Vader had no such hesitation. You offered them lies dressed as truth, hope purchased with the price of their free will. They think they chose, but you manipulated their desperation, preyed on their suffering. That is not choice. That is exploitation. The Dark Lord raised his hand, and Luke felt him gathering the Force, not for attack, but for something else. Something Luke had never sensed his father do before. Vader was reaching out through the Force, not to dominate or control, but to show. He projected images into the minds of the converted citizens, memories of the worlds the Ori had destroyed, the populations they had erased, the promises they had broken. He showed them the truth beneath the lies. Some of the converted citizens faltered, their eyes flickering between white glow and natural color, doubt creeping into their certainty. Others held firm, their faith unshaken, but enough wavered that the human shield began to break apart. Now, Vader said quietly, and Luke understood. They charged together, father and son, their lightsabers singing through the air. The priors met them with desperate ferocity, their staffs channeling every remaining ounce of power, their techniques refined through battles across multiple galaxies. This was no easy victory, no simple triumph. This was a war of attrition, two priors fighting for their lives against two Force users who refused to quit. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Luke's green blade and Vader's red blade wove patterns of light in the darkness, striking and parrying, attacking and defending, slowly, inexorably pushing the priors back. And finally, when both Skywalkers were running on nothing but will and the Force itself, Luke's blade found an opening. His lightsaber pierced the first prior's heart, and the being fell without a sound. The second prior, seeing his partner fall, his eyes wide with the first genuine terror Luke had seen from any Ori, dropped his staff and raised his hands. Please, the prior whispered, his divine certainty finally shattered. Please, we were just following orders, just spreading the Ori's truth. We didn't know, we didn't understand. Vader's blade rose, prepared to strike the final blow, but Luke grabbed his father's arm, stopping him. No, Luke said firmly. He surrenders. We don't kill prisoners. He is an enemy combatant, Vader argued. He will convert again if given the chance. Then we make sure he doesn't get that chance, Luke replied. But we don't become executioners. That's what separates us from them. For a long moment, Vader stood frozen, his blade raised, and Luke felt the war raging inside his father, the dark side demanding the kill, the faint glimmer of light suggesting mercy. And then, slowly, Vader deactivated his lightsaber. Very well, my son, Vader said quietly. We take him prisoner. But know that mercy may be a luxury we cannot afford. Luke nodded, accepting the compromise, and together they bound the prior using Force suppression techniques, ensuring he couldn't convert anyone else. Around them, the converted citizens were slowly waking from their stupor, confusion and fear replacing the certainty that had driven them moments before. It was over. 6 priors, defeated. Coruscant, saved, at least for now. But as Luke and Vader made their way back to the surface, supporting each other through exhaustion and injury, Luke felt through the Force that this was not the end. The Ori fleet still orbited above, and reinforcements would come. This was just one battle in a war that was far from finished. And somewhere, watching through the Force, Luke felt a presence stirring, ancient, powerful, and waiting. Master Yoda had survived, just as Luke had hoped, and now the true fight to save the galaxy could begin. The Ori fleet withdrew from Coruscant orbit 72 hours after the Prior's defeat on the surface, but they didn't retreat far. Their 14 remaining warships established a perimeter at the edge of the system, close enough to threaten but far enough to regroup and reassess. Imperial and New Republic sensor stations tracked them constantly, watching for any sign of renewed attack, but the Ori seemed content to wait, to observe, to plan their next move with the patience of beings who measured time in eons rather than years. Luke stood in what remained of the Jedi Temple's meditation chamber, one of the few rooms that had survived Imperial occupation relatively intact. The room was circular, its walls carved with ancient symbols that predated even the Old Republic, and its floor bore scorch marks from Vader's earlier presence. His father had come here immediately after the battle, seeking something Luke didn't fully understand yet. Through the Force, Luke felt Vader approaching now, his dark presence like a storm cloud moving through the temple's corridors. But the storm felt different. Still powerful, still tinged with darkness, but no longer quite as absolute, as if encountering something that challenged his certainty had created cracks in the armor of hatred he'd worn for decades. The door opened, and Darth Vader entered, his breathing steady, his posture as rigid as ever. But Luke, who had learned to read his father's body language through their growing Force bond, noticed the subtle signs of exhaustion. The slight hitch in his gait, the way his hand rested against his chest as if the cybernetics there were paining him. "The New Republic delegation is preparing to depart," Vader said without preamble. "Mon Mothma wishes to thank you personally before leaving. She also wishes to discuss the terms of our continued alliance against the Ori." "Our alliance," Luke repeated, moving to stand before his father. "Father, what happens when the Ori are defeated? Do the Empire and New Republic simply return to war? Do we forget that we fought together, that we saved each other's lives?" Vader was silent for a long moment, his mask turned toward the temple's damaged walls. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight Luke had never heard before, vulnerability, wrapped in mechanical distortion. "I do not know, my son. The Emperor spent decades building the Empire, creating a structure that demands absolute obedience and crushes dissent. That structure still exists, even with Palpatine dead. The Imperial officers, the Moffs, the military commanders. They believe in order through strength, in peace through dominance. I am not certain they can be convinced to simply let go. Can you?" Luke asked quietly. "Can you let go of the dark side, of the hatred that's defined you for so long?" Vader turned to face him, and through the Force, Luke felt his father's internal struggle, a war between the man he had been and the monster he had become. "When I fought beside you against the Priors, I felt something I thought long dead. The satisfaction of fighting for something beyond myself, beyond power or revenge. It was," Vader paused, searching for words. "It was what I felt during the Clone Wars, when I fought alongside my Padawan, when I believed the Jedi were protecting the galaxy. Before Mustafar. Before everything turned to ash." Luke stepped closer, placing a hand on his father's armored forearm. "It's not too late. Master Yoda told me before he went into hiding. Balance is possible, even for those who have fallen far. You proved that when you killed the Prior at the palace, when you chose to protect innocence instead of seeking only power. That wasn't the dark side acting through you. That was Anakin Skywalker." "Anakin Skywalker is dead," Vader said, but the words lacked their usual conviction. "I killed him on Mustafar, along with everything he loved. There is only Vader now." "I don't believe that," Luke replied firmly. "And I don't think you do either, not anymore. The Ori showed you that power alone isn't enough, that even beings with godlike abilities can be defeated by those who fight for something greater than themselves. You and I, we fought together because we both wanted to save people, not dominate them. That's not the dark side. That's the man my mother loved, the man Ben told me about. That's Anakin." Vader pulled away, his breathing ragged, his hands clenched into fists. "Do not speak her name. Do not remind me of what I destroyed. Padme died because of my choices, because I was weak, because I thought I could control the darkness and instead it consumed me. Everything I have done since, every atrocity, every murder, it was all to prove that her death had meaning, that the power I gained was worth the price. But the Ori," he trailed off, his voice breaking slightly through the vocoder distortion. "The Ori showed me that even power beyond imagining can be hollow. Can be defeated. Can be meaningless." Luke felt tears sting his eyes, seeing his father, the terror of the galaxy, the Dark Lord who had murdered Jedi and subjugated worlds, finally confronting the truth he'd been running from for 23 years. It doesn't have to stay meaningless. You can choose differently now. Help us fight the Ori, yes, but also help us build something better after. The Empire doesn't have to be about domination. The New Republic doesn't have to repeat the mistakes of the old one. Together, we could create something new, something balanced. You ask the impossible, Vader said, but his tone had shifted from absolute refusal to painful consideration. The galaxy knows me as a monster. The New Republic will never accept my presence, never trust me to. Then prove them wrong, Luke interrupted. Not through power, but through action. Show them that even the darkest soul can find redemption. Master Yoda is still alive, Father. I felt his presence through the Force during the battle. He's been hiding, gathering survivors, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. We're going to find him, and when we do, I'm bringing you with me. Vader's mask turned sharply toward Luke, his posture radiating shock. Yoda. The Grand Master lives. He foresaw the Ori's arrival, Luke explained. Not the specifics, but he sensed a disturbance in the Force, something that would threaten the entire galaxy. That's why he went into hiding after the Empire fell. Not to abandon us, but to prepare. He's been searching for Force-sensitive survivors, anyone who escaped the Purge or the Inquisitors. He's building something, Father. A new generation of Force users who can stand against threats like the Ori. And you believe Yoda will accept me, Vader said flatly. The Jedi Master who trained me as a youngling, who warned the Council that I was too old, too emotional, too dangerous. The same Master who would have killed me on sight during the Empire's reign. You believe he will simply forgive? I believe he'll give you a chance to prove you've changed, Luke corrected. Master Yoda taught me that the Force seeks balance above all else. Light and dark, life and death, hope and despair, all of it in harmony. You represent the dark, Father, but you're also my father, and that connection means something. If you're willing to face Yoda, to face judgment for your crimes, then maybe, just maybe, we can forge an alliance strong enough to defeat the Ori permanently. Vader stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, his breathing the only sound in the meditation chamber. Through their Force bond, Luke felt the war raging inside his father, decades of darkness and pain and hatred grinding against the faint spark of light that had never quite died, the part of Anakin Skywalker that had saved Luke from the Emperor, that had fought beside his son against impossible odds. Finally, Vader spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Where is Yoda? Luke smiled, relief flooding through him. His presence comes from the unknown regions, beyond the Outer Rim. A planet strong in the Force, hidden from Imperial records. I don't have exact coordinates yet, but Master Yoda has been calling to me through the Force since the Ori arrived. He wants us to find him. All of us, Jedi, former Imperials, anyone willing to fight for the galaxy's freedom. Then we will need ships, Vader said, his tone shifting back to tactical assessment. A fleet capable of defending itself while traveling through the unknown regions, where Ori warships may be waiting. We will need supplies, personnel, and most critically, we will need to convince both the Empire and the New Republic that this journey is worth risking their limited resources. Leave that to me, Luke said. Leia and Mon Mothma trust me, and Grand Admiral Pelion has already proven he's willing to cooperate when the stakes are high enough. If we present this as our best chance to find allies strong enough to challenge the Ori, they'll support us. Allies, Vader repeated, and something in his voice made Luke turn to look at his father more carefully. Luke, you must understand, if we find Yoda, if we gather Force-sensitive survivors, we will be creating an army. Not Jedi, not Sith, but something unprecedented. Force users from across the spectrum, light, dark, and everything between, united by necessity rather than philosophy. Such an alliance will be fragile, dangerous, and prone to internal conflict. I know, Luke acknowledged. But it's also our only chance. The Ori can't be defeated by conventional military force, we proved that at Coruscant. Their technology is too advanced, their force abilities too refined. We need force users who can match them, who can disrupt their connection to the midi-chlorians they've stolen, who can protect the minds of our people from conversion. And we need enough of them that losing a few doesn't mean losing the war. Vader nodded slowly. Then we begin immediately. But Luke, when we find Yoda, when we gather these survivors, you must be prepared for what comes after. Some of them will be former Jedi who survived the Purge. Others will be Inquisitors who abandoned the Empire when Palpatine died. Still others may be Force sensitives who never aligned with any faction, who learned to use their abilities in isolation. These groups have been enemies for decades. Uniting them will require leadership stronger than anything the old Jedi Order possessed. Then it's a good thing I have help, Luke said, meeting his father's masked gaze. I'm not doing this alone. I have you, I have Leia, I have Yoda's wisdom to guide me. Together, we'll find a way to make it work. We have to, because the alternative is watching the Ori convert the entire galaxy, one world at a time. The door to the meditation chamber opened, and Leia entered, her diplomatic robes replaced with practical traveling clothes, her expression serious but determined. Behind her came Grand Admiral Pelion, his imperial uniform pristine despite the recent battles, his face carefully neutral. Luke, Lord Vader, Leia said, nodding to both. Mon Mothma has approved the expedition to find Master Yoda. We're committing 3 MC-80 cruisers and their support vessels to the mission. Admiral Pelion has volunteered Imperial ships as well. For Star Destroyers and their escort flotillas, Pelion confirmed, then turned to Vader with something that might have been respect in his eyes. Lord Vader, with your permission, I would like to assign the Executor II to this mission. We'll need a flagship capable of commanding both Imperial and Republic forces, and your vessel is the most powerful warship we have. Vader considered this, then inclined his head. Acceptable. We depart within 48 hours. That gives us time to resupply, repair battle damage, and brief our crews on what they're facing. But understand, Admiral, this mission may take us beyond known space, into regions where our maps are incomplete and our navigation uncertain. We may be gone for weeks or even months. The Ori aren't giving us much choice, Pelion replied grimly. They're regrouping, calling for reinforcements from their home galaxy. Our intelligence suggests they're preparing for a full-scale invasion within 3 months. If we don't find allies capable of matching their force abilities by then, Coruscant's defense will look like a minor skirmish compared to what's coming. Luke absorbed this information, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders. 3 months to find Yoda, to gather force-sensitive survivors, to train them if necessary, and to return with enough power to challenge an invasion force that commanded both technology and the Force. It seemed impossible. But then again, destroying the Death Star had seemed impossible. Redeeming Darth Vader had seemed impossible. And yet here they stood, father and son, preparing to embark on a mission that might save the galaxy. Then we don't waste time, Luke said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to trust in the Force. Leia, coordinate with the New Republic fleet. Make sure our ships are prepared for extended operations in unknown territory. Admiral Pelion, brief your Imperial crews on the mission parameters and make it clear that this is a joint operation. Any commander who can't work alongside Republic forces stays behind. And father, he turned to Vader, extending his hand. Help me plot our course. Between your knowledge of Imperial exploration data and my connection to Master Yoda through the Force, we should be able to narrow down his location. Vader looked at Luke's outstretched hand for a long moment, and through their Force bond, Luke felt the magnitude of what this simple gesture represented. In the Sith philosophy, such vulnerability was weakness. In the dark side's teaching, accepting help was admitting inadequacy. But Vader reached out and grasped his son's hand, his armored gauntlet enclosing Luke's fingers with surprising gentleness. Together, Vader said simply, and in that single word, Luke heard a promise. Not of redemption completed, but of a journey begun. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. Ships were refueled and rearmed, crews were briefed and rotated to ensure fresh personnel for the long voyage ahead, and diplomatic channels burned with communications between Coruscant and Chandrila as both governments coordinated their unprecedented cooperation. In orbit, the combined Imperial Republic fleet assembled. A force that would have been unthinkable mere weeks ago, Star Destroyers and Mon Calamari cruisers flying in formation, TIE fighters and X-Wings sharing patrol routes. And throughout it all, Luke meditated, reaching out through the Force toward that distant presence he'd felt since the Ori arrived. Master Yoda was waiting, his ancient consciousness like a beacon in the darkness, guiding Luke toward a destination whose name he didn't yet know but whose importance he felt with absolute certainty. On the morning of the third day, as the fleet prepared to make the jump to hyperspace, Luke stood on the bridge of the Executor II beside his father, watching the assembled ships through the massive viewport. Leia stood on his other side, her hand in his, their Force bond thrumming with shared determination and fear and hope. "This is it," Leia said quietly. "Once we jump, we're committed. No turning back, no reinforcements if things go wrong. Just us and whatever we find out there." "We'll find what we need," Luke replied with more confidence than he felt. Master Yoda didn't survive the Empire just to hide forever. He's been preparing for this, gathering allies, waiting for the moment when the galaxy would need the Force users who remained. That moment is now. Vader's breathing filled the bridge, steady and mechanical, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the command deck. "All ships, this is Lord Vader. We are about to undertake a mission unlike any in Imperial or Republic history. We travel into the unknown regions, seeking allies against an enemy that threatens to enslave our entire galaxy. Some of you will question this mission. Some of you will doubt that cooperation between our factions is possible. But I tell you now, we have already proven it is possible. At Coruscant, we fought together and survived what should have destroyed us. In the battles ahead, we will need that same unity, that same willingness to see past old grudges and focus on the true threat. May the Force be with us all." The bridge crew responded with the crisp efficiency of Imperial discipline, but Luke noticed something else. Several officers exchanged glances, their expressions showing not just obedience, but genuine conviction. His father's words had reached them, had reminded them that they weren't just following orders, but fighting for something that mattered. "Coordinates locked in," the navigation officer reported. "Hyperspace jump in 30 seconds. Luke closed his eyes, reaching out one final time through the Force, feeling the web of connections that bound him to everyone on this mission, his sister, his father, the crews of dozens of ships, and far ahead, waiting patiently in the darkness, Master Yoda. The Force sang with possibility, with danger, with the promise of battles yet to come and allies yet to be found. "Jump," Vader commanded, and the Executor II leaped into hyperspace, pulling the entire fleet with it. Behind them, Coruscant began the slow work of recovery, its citizens trying to understand what had happened, trying to process the knowledge that beings claiming divinity had attacked their world and been driven back, not by any one faction, but by enemies who had chosen to become allies. And at the edge of the system, the 14 Ori warships watched the fleet's departure with the patient awareness of predators who knew their prey would return. The priors aboard those ships communed with their gods across the dimensional barrier, reporting their losses, requesting guidance, and receiving a response that chilled even their fanatical certainty. The Ori were sending more forces. Not just warships, but armies. Not just priors, but crusaders, warriors who had been raised from birth to spread the Ori's truth, trained in combat and conversion, equipped with technology that would make even the enhanced prior seem primitive. The invasion would come within 3 months, as Imperial intelligence had predicted, but it would be far worse than anyone imagined. The galaxy had won a single battle. But the war for its very soul had only just begun, and the outcome would be decided not by technology or numbers, but by whether Luke Skywalker could forge an alliance of Force users strong enough to stand against gods. In the unknown regions, on a world whose name had been forgotten by galactic civilization, an ancient Jedi Master opened his eyes for meditation and smiled. The Skywalkers were coming, father and son together, and with them came the hope the galaxy desperately needed. But hope alone would not be enough. The trials ahead would test them all, Jedi and Sith, light and dark, Empire and Republic, and only those who could embrace true balance would survive. "Ready, we are," Yoda murmured to the assembled Force sensitives around him, former Jedi, redeemed Inquisitors, self-taught wielders who had never known the old orders. The battle for the galaxy's soul, begun it has. And win it, we must. For fail we do, and darkness eternal shall fall. In the meditation circle, dozens of Force users ignited their lightsabers, green, blue, yellow, purple, and yes, even red, creating a rainbow of light that pierced the darkness. They were broken, they were flawed, they were everything the old orders had feared. But they were also united by necessity, by survival, by the understanding that the time for philosophical purity had passed. The age of balance had begun, and the Ori would learn what the Empire and the Rebellion had already discovered, that the Force, when wielded by those who truly understood it, could move mountains, change hearts, and defeat even gods. The journey to find Master Yoda would take weeks, perhaps months, but it was a journey that carried the hopes of an entire galaxy. As the combined Imperial Republic fleet traversed the unknown regions, navigating through uncharted hyperspace lanes and stellar anomalies that had kept these worlds hidden for millennia, Luke Skywalker stood between two legacies, the light of the Jedi his mentors had tried to preserve, and the darkness of the Sith his father had embraced. Yet he had learned through fire and sacrifice that true strength lay not in choosing one over the other, but in understanding both, in finding harmony where others saw only conflict. The Ori had invaded believing themselves invincible, their hybrid mastery of technology and the stolen Force seeming unstoppable. They had conquered galaxies, converted trillions, and walked as gods among mortals who had no defense against their power. But they had never encountered a galaxy like this one, a galaxy that had survived the Clone Wars, endured the Empire's tyranny, and produced heroes who refused to surrender even when victory seemed impossible. On Coruscant, the wounded capital began its recovery, its citizens forever changed by the knowledge that salvation had come not from a single faction, but from cooperation between ancient enemies. The Empire and the New Republic had proven that survival mattered more than ideology, that facing extinction together was better than dying divided. That lesson would echo through the months ahead as both governments worked to maintain their fragile alliance against the invasion they knew was coming. Darth Vader stood at a crossroads, his absolute certainty in the dark side shaken by beings who wielded power beyond anything Palpatine had achieved yet could still be defeated. The priors had shown him that strength without wisdom was hollow, that domination without purpose was meaningless. Whether he could truly find redemption, whether Anakin Skywalker could emerge from beneath Vader's mask, remained uncertain. But for the first time in 23 years, he was willing to try. For his son. For the memory of the woman he had loved and destroyed. For the possibility that even the darkest soul might find light again. And Master Yoda waited in the unknown regions, ancient beyond measure, having witnessed the Jedi Order's fall and the Empire's rise, knowing that the old ways had failed and something new must emerge. Around him gathered the survivors, Force sensitives who had hidden, who had fought, who had refused to let their abilities die even when the galaxy tried to erase them. They were the seeds of what would come next, not Jedi, not Sith, but something balanced, something capable of standing against threats that neither pure light nor pure darkness could defeat alone. The Ori would return with their crusaders, their armies, their absolute conviction that this galaxy must bow before divine mandate. They would bring fire and faith, technology and conversion, the weight of eons spent conquering lesser civilizations. But they would face something they had never encountered before, a galaxy that had learned through suffering that unity was stronger than division, that hope burned brightest in the darkest hours, and that the Force itself demanded balance, not domination. 3 months remained before the invasion. 3 months to find allies, to train warriors, to forge weapons capable of disrupting the Ori's hybrid technology. 3 months to transform enemies into brothers, to unite light and dark, to prove that a galaxy far, far away would not kneel before false gods. Luke Skywalker had destroyed the Death Star as a farm boy with a dream. He had redeemed Darth Vader as a Jedi with faith in goodness that others thought naive. Now he would face his greatest challenge yet. Becoming the bridge between opposing philosophies, the living embodiment of balance, the leader who could unite Force users across every tradition and ideology. The battle for Coruscant had been won, but the war was only beginning. And when it was over, when the Ori had been driven back or destroyed, the galaxy would be forever changed. The old orders would not return. The Empire and the New Republic would forge something new. And the Force, that ancient energy binding all living things, would finally find the balance it had sought since the first beings reached out and touched its power. The Skywalker legacy, father and son, darkness and light, hope and redemption, would define the galaxy's future. Not through dominance, but through sacrifice. Not through certainty, but through the courage to question, to grow, to change. The Force had waited millennia for this moment. And now, as a fleet of unlikely allies traveled toward a destiny none could fully foresee, that moment had finally arrived. May the Force be with them all. For in the trials ahead, they would need every ounce of its power, every whisper of its wisdom, and every promise of balance it had ever offered. The age of gods claiming dominion had begun. But so too had the age of mortals refusing to kneel.